Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 103 of Bitcoin HardTalk. We're going to be answering a question that I have been asked so many times, probably every single week for 14 years, or something like that. I'm exaggerating anyway, but it comes up frequently. And I've answered it so many times, I wanted to create a comprehensive episode that really covers the best of what I've discovered to answer the question, did Bitcoin and is Bitcoin created by the CIA, and who is Satoshi Nakamoto? And then once we've got that done, we're going to be going through several different opinions. And I want to do a really critical and honest assessment of it. And then I'm also going to determine whether it actually matters or not, so that whenever anyone asks me this question, I can just send them to this video. Now, what we're going to be doing for the live, sit back, relax. We're going to be doing long form content. I'm going to be going through a bunch of videos. I'm going to comprehensively answer all the connections between Bitcoin and intelligence agencies. And then we're going to make sure that you have the information that you need. The reason for this is because Tucker Carlson, which obviously is getting millions and millions of views at the moment, because of there is an operation in order to expose Zionism for what it is. Because if anyone is a long-term listener of Bitcoin HardTalk, you'll know, and you would have predicted, and you would have watched the theater that we are witnessing right now while America pretends that it wasn't behind the genocide in Gaza and blames it on the fact that they were blackmailed and it was Israel and nothing to do with the profits of the military industrial complex, or to prop up the dollar in the debt-based Ponzi scheme, or the fact that the dollar is backed by genocide, war, destruction, and violence. But everyone that watches Bitcoin HardTalk would have seen play by play everything that's happening right now. Are you enjoying the show? I've been getting lots of tweets saying, hey, you said it's like you wrote the script. So now suddenly you're going to have Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen de-radicalizing some of the evangelical Christians. And then we're going to see the agreement that holds. And then there's going to be a pushback. And then we're going to have the demilitarization. Then we're going to see the different factions come in and everything that I talked about. And then I was saying that we're going to have the overthrow of the Israeli cabinet, and then a recognition that Zionism is not the ultimate power structure of the world. In fact, Trump has been bought by the GCC because he is bowing to the financial industrial complex, and we will get a military industrial complex exit from the forever war model, and they will retreat towards Europe and Latin and Central and South America to make up for lost profits, to prop up the dollar as America becomes a regional power because of the normalization between Saudi and Iran brokered by China. And the proof of weapons network is retreating to regional as a multipolar world order is set. You're going to watch it all, and we're going to share the journey, and we share the journey every week. But today I wanted to answer the question, was CIA, was part of their plan Bitcoin? And Tucker Carlson, if you watch his videos where Putin actually called him out for his application to the CIA and the fact that his parents are intelligence as well, for all those reasons, he obviously was asking, and he said, I won't buy Bitcoin because I believe it was created by the CIA. Now, a lot of people are going to listen to that and maybe take that advice. But what I want to do is dig deep, because there's a lot of nuance in that, because there is actually part of Bitcoin that were created by the NSA, and there was a lot of intelligence connections. But I want to make sure that you don't just get this shallow answer and therefore you reach the conclusion, I'm not going to invest in Bitcoin, and you miss out of the ability to opt out of the system. So we're going to do it in true Bitcoin HardTalk fashion. I'm going to tell some stories from my early days. For those new to the show, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent 25 years of my life obsessing over investing and money, and 14 years on Bitcoin. Having invested in Bitcoin at $3, spoke at the first Bitcoin conference in the world, and wrote the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. That's the Mandarin version, and the English version is over there. Invested in over 100 companies that ended up making the sector, and have been guiding people ever since to buy more Bitcoin each month, and own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, as a peaceful boycott in self-custody to own your own money, spend your own money, and have a fixed supply independent of the central banks that outperformed every single node of the proof of weapons network, the fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme that is backed up by death, destruction, war, and violence and covert operations that we cover and uncover each and every week. Okay, so some people, and Tucker Carlson may have put some people off. I'm going to share some of the stories from the early days. And I'm going to play some videos so that we break this up. And we've done a few new things here. Firstly, we got the comments. So if you're trolling in YouTube, head over to YouTube and you can participate in the live chat. If we got some time, we'll take some of your questions at the end and see if we can experiment with a bit of audience participation. We'll see how we get on. And also, we're going to be playing some videos throughout, and I'm going to be giving some live commentary. After this, we'll make shorter form content. We'll use a bit of AI tools in order to make that for those that don't have time to sit back. But if you're anything like me, you want all the detail and so that you can comprehensively understand it so that then you can make wise decisions, knowing that often there is a lot of nuance in that. So without further ado, I'd like to just tell you one early story. And then I'm going to go into the first clip around the name Satoshi Nakamoto and its connection to intelligence. Now, before I do that, I'm going to turn over to a video by somebody called Richard Werner. He was interviewed on Tucker Carlson recently. Now, I knew him from before Bitcoin because I was part of a community called the Monetary Reform Community. And I spoke at a conference called Transforming Finance. And it was a partnership between a finance lab and an organization called Positive Money. And there were three of us that went in very different directions. And Richard was one of those. Now, Richard was a part of consulting the Bank of Japan, and he was a part of essentially inventing quantitative easing, which started in Japan with the Bank of Japan. He also has spent his time exposing much of the stuff that we expose on Bitcoin HardTalk, that in fact banks create money every time they issue a loan. Now, back in the monetary reform days before Bitcoin, that was a controversial subject. I got chucked out of universities like London School of Economics, University College of London, Birkbeck University, even University in Chicago, for daring to suggest that actually the vast amount of money in the world is created by credit in a debt-based Ponzi scheme by the private banking sector, who are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. And in fact, they are not lending out grandma's savings. And the multiplier effect doesn't exist, is what we're taught in economics, because there is no fraction and there is no reserve. And in fact, Wall Street created this whole scheme by funding Nazi Germany, creating the Federal Reserve. The two brothers at the Warburg family were the governor at the Federal Reserve, as well as the Reichsbank that was connected to the Bank for International Settlement that funded the Nazi fascism regime. And it also funded the Bolshevik Revolution that overthrew the Tsar, the Russian Tsar, and replaced it with the Soviet Union and had the first communist agenda, and also created the Federal Reserve with the same model that they created with the Bank of England to bankrupt the US government. And now it's got the government in $38 trillion of debt by funding a continual state of war ever since World War I. And you know that I call this mechanism the proof of weapons network. And it is the financing that allows me and following the money to get around the narratives and the media. Right. So Richard Werner, he went in a different direction to myself, and Ben Dyson, one of the third person in this story, went in a different direction. So I was presenting in Parliament at the UK at the time. I lived in the UK. And we were presenting after the financial crisis. I'd left investment banking at this point, 2006. We had the Lehman Brothers Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2008. We had BlackRock that was then using Aladdin in order to purchase Barclays iShares, which gave them all the ETFs, that gave them all the control that they have right now over 20,000 shares by having these passive investment vehicles that gives them voting rights and the ability to manage this proof of weapons network and portfolio that I often talk about. And that was 2008. And then the conference was round about, I think, 2009, round about the same time from memory, the Bitcoin was kicking off. We had the white paper in 2008. And then the code was launched in January 2009. And then we had this positive money conference. And this was after speaking at Parliament, trying to do banking reform, sharing how banks work. And then we had the crisis and everyone got interested in this topic. But no one really cared because they got bailed out and they socialized the losses and privatized the gain and consolidated power in the same the same companies that created the proof of weapons network. And so from there, I decided that I was going to try and create a non-fractional reserve bank. It was called Bank to the Future at the time. We ended up pivoting into a different business, which was funding Bitcoin and financial innovation companies in the end. But it was originally going to be a non-fractional reserve bank. I've told this story before, but very briefly, they said you can't build a non-fractional reserve bank. You need to put $60 million at the Bank of England as a deposit for your application. And then you need to build it on top of Barclays. So you don't create fractional reserves, but they create the fractional reserves for you. And no, you can't become a clearing bank, and you can't allow people to own their own money, and you can't have 100% reserves. Therefore, you become a node on top of the fractional reserve banking system. And so that was useless. And I was very despondent at the time and found Bitcoin. I was invited to speak at the first Bitcoin conference. I was writing my book on monetary reform, talked about things like central bank digital currencies and various other things with digital, reserves and various other things that those names came around later. At this conference anyway, I decided to go down the Bitcoin path because as soon as I saw that you could have money that you can own, money that you can spend without permission in an innocent until proven guilty system, and thirdly, a fixed money supply that no central bank. So you could spend it without government permission, you could own it without a bank, and the monetary policy was independent of any central bank. So immediately I got it. And that's when I really went down the path of pivoting from a non-fractional reserve bank to supporting banks. Supporting Bitcoin. I'm still a little bit jet lagged after my travel, but supporting the Bitcoin community. And we funded companies like Coinbase, Kraken, Bitfinex, Circle, Bitstamp, and was an early investor in many of them. Created a fund that paid daily dividends in Bitcoin backed by a mining farm in Iceland, created a Bitcoin bond in Iceland, and did lots and lots of financial innovation that got thousands of Bitcoin in the hands of as many people as possible at the time. That built a really nice community of people that some of them went on to become billionaires. Many of them are millionaires. Obviously, we got to build the community as it is today. And so what happened is I went down that route, and the other two told me, Ben Dyson said, yeah, Bitcoin's a scam. It's a Ponzi scheme. And he said, we need to fix digital fiat currency. And we need to make it just like in Nazi Germany, they actually printed money and created a labor-backed currency. It was called National Socialism. And then they used the money in order to get out of the Weimar Republic. And from the Weimar Republic, created one of the fastest growing economies. Now, it was actually subsidized by the Bank for International Settlements transferring gold as Hitler invaded different countries. And so you got those two parts. You got the gold backing part of it, and you have a labor-backed currency that has no usury and no debt, and it's not created as credit. And that obviously funded that movement, and that was resisted with the proof of weapons network in order to vassalize these countries and create the gold reserves at the Fort Knox, and then fund every side, communism, fake capitalism with the Federal Reserve, and then kill fascism and National Socialism because they didn't want a currency that wasn't backed by debt and wasn't a Ponzi scheme. And so he was going through the reforms, and he ended up, to my surprise, working for the Bank of England in their central bank digital currency department, and then left the Bank of England to work for the Bank for International Settlements the creator of the proof of weapons network that created the European Union and the single currency and the surveillance state that we're talking today. So we went in down completely different paths. Literally, we are going to have a central bank digital currency that came from those early days. So that's where Ben went. And then the final one was Richard. And Richard said, I'm skeptical about Bitcoin. I think it came from intelligence and the CIA. So he never really promoted Bitcoin. And then later we went down these three paths. So he was part of the quantitative easing, and he was trying to get banks to, rather than create money to prop up the speculative market, he wanted to create community banks. And those community banks would only create money if it goes into entrepreneurship. And so by funding business, you prop up the non-speculative, the business side of the economy, which can be productive, and productive lending can prop up the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And you can supplement it with quantitative easing and do Keynesian economics, basically. The other one is basically communism on a blockchain with central bank digital currencies. And mine was, I think, Austrian economics, which is Bitcoin. So we had Keynesianism, we had communism, and we had Austrian economics. And we went down these three different paths. And it was interesting to see Richard Werner on the Tucker Carlson show recently sharing the same philosophies that we were talking about back then. And now Ben works for the Bank for International Settlements, destroying the world with surveillance. And I've been trying to free people with Bitcoin and got full financial independence as a result of it, and built my business where I didn't need any Silicon Valley money, didn't need to go public, built the whole thing independent with Bitcoin, Bitcoin treasury, all sorts of stuff. So, right, that is that story. And I think you find that pretty interesting. So now what I want to do is I want to play the first video of why Richard believed that Bitcoin was an asset of intelligence. So what I'm going to do right now, and Azad's going to let me know if I make any mistakes here, but I'm going to share my screen. And if this all works correctly, I'm going to put it on a little bit of speed, but we're going to watch the first video of why Richard believed that Satoshi Nakamoto was part of the Central Intelligence, CIA. And it's a pretty compelling case, and we're going to review it and see what it actually means. So I've got to put the sound on. Let's make sure that the sound comes through. Okay, great. And now I'm going to put it on full screen mode. And there's Richard. Hopefully you can see Richard. Azad, let me know if you can't. And then I'm going to play the sound. And if it doesn't work, Azad will let me know.
Introduction of Bitcoin. Okay. It started really with the introduction of Bitcoin. Okay. And, there's a Bitcoin white paper. Earlier, there were various white papers by the NSA, which is a sort of sister organization to the CIA. And then Bitcoin was actually pushed by some mainstream organizations, such as the Financial Times. Very early on, the Reuters and Bloomberg that put out financial quotes would already include Bitcoin prices. And there would be big articles about Bitcoin when it was totally fringe and tiny. Nobody knew about it. But then there was more and more. And then some of the large banks, JP Morgan, started to say that, well, we're going to collaborate with people that work with Bitcoin or other similar electronic, distributed ledger, blockchain-related currencies similar to Bitcoin. And then also central banks said, oh, we have to get in on this. And so Bitcoin has served as a sort of excuse for central banks to be able to say, we also need, there's this market demand for this now. In fact, this is what Lagarde said. That's why we need to consider now introducing CBDCs, because we have to offer something. When really, as I said, there's no need. We have digital currency. We've got bank digital currency. Yeah. That's worked well. There's no, and particularly in continental Europe, it's actually the best system in the world. It's very fast transactions. Yeah. There's almost never an error. I've been in other countries where you have entire items and systems to handle reconciliation errors and settlement errors and so on. Yeah. It doesn't happen in Europe. So it's a very effective system. And so why do we need something? You see, that's where Bitcoin was useful. Is that, we do need something else now, because central banks also need to offer something similar to Bitcoin, which is a very weak argument, really.
Okay, is it somehow related that they might introduce Bitcoin themselves to, in the end, make the argument that they also needed a digital coin?
Yeah, exactly. That's it, you see. So,
because the origins of Bitcoin are still, it's a black box. Nobody knows.
Okay, just want to give a bit of commentary on that. So basically, his argument is, which I think is correct. And so Richard obviously supported credit creation as long as it goes through regional banks and is used for productive capacity. And so he essentially believes that it's okay for banks to create digital currency every time they issue a loan. And his argument was that if you could create a digital version, which was Bitcoin, that then they could use that to get adoption and then create their own coin, which would be a central bank digital currency. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. That might have been one of the original early reasons to do that. But in a later clip, we're going to go through, what happened and how it became open source and why that might have changed the plan slightly. But anyway, that's the first argument. And the second argument, which I think is very compelling, is around the name Satoshi Nakamoto and how it might be a name that actually reveals that it was created by intelligence. So let's go through that.
They give you some hints. Yeah. For example, I mean, I've said this many years ago, having lived in Japan for 12 years, I was interested in the fact that the alleged legendary or apocryphal founder of Bitcoin is called Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yeah.
Now, I thought, okay, what does that mean, Satoshi Nakamoto? And then there was no such person. There were people saying, is it this person or that person? But nobody really seemed to be the actual Satoshi Nakamoto. But that's the sort of name they used. And it is a Japanese name. Yeah. Okay, if it's a Japanese name, well, then let's treat it like a Japanese name, which means step one, put it in the order of Japanese names. Now, in all Asian languages, you put the family name first. Yeah. So it's Nakamoto Satoshi. Yeah. That's step one. Okay. Step two, write it in Japanese. And if we had a board, I'd write it down. So write it in, they actually use Chinese characters for this. Nakamoto is very, very simple. It's Naka, which is also part of the name for China, the center, the central kingdom, Oh, okay. And Moto is the second character of Japan, the origin of the sun, the origin. So center, origin. And Satoshi is the Chinese character for wisdom or intelligence. Now, you often use two characters to emphasize one concept. You could read this. So this could mean very central. So center and then moto together is really central, okay? And Satoshi, you can translate it as intelligence. So we're really saying this name means central intelligence.
Well, yeah, it's yeah.
Anyway, so when it's clear that
I never heard this, I never read this, so yeah.
Well, you've got to at least have some basic understanding of Japanese and writing these in Japanese. But I think the Secret Service agencies, they like to sometimes give hints, because really they like to be talked about, but they have to work in secret,
So a pretty compelling case of how the name might be connected to central intelligence in terms of Satoshi Nakamoto, and a reasonable story around why they were created. So the important outcome from here is, even if you believe that the name Satoshi Nakamoto gives everything you need to know as a code name for central intelligence, what was the basis of the argument? The basis of the argument was to give people a digital currency that they can use, and once they've used it, get them onto another currency. So it's not actually saying that Bitcoin itself is the problem. It's saying that it's a gateway drug onto another currency. So that lays the foundation, the basis of his argument. And obviously he works for banks around credit creation and consults bank and created quantitative easing. So you can put that together in terms of what his interest may be. That's the first clip that I wanted to play. Right, now what I wanted to do is I wanted to play a second clip. And this second clip is with a gentleman called Mark Yusko. Now, Mark Yusko is somebody that I've met a few times because we invested in some of the same Bitcoin companies over time. So later he came along and he had a fund, I think it was Morgan Creek or something like that. And he started to get into Bitcoin a lot later and investing in a bunch of companies. Now, I was looking at investing in companies where you could borrow against your Bitcoin because I thought this would be a good case at the time. And he just invested in a company called BlockFi. Everyone that knows the history, you'll know that what happened to BlockFi. It ended up in Chapter 11 when the leveraged market for borrowing against your Bitcoin, which I think is pretty interesting because today JP Morgan announced that they're going to be doing the same. as well. And I've been warning people all along. If you've watched previous episodes about BlackRock's plan, you can go back and see those as well. So Mark Yusko, anyway, he was on a podcast and he got the same question. And so what he attempted to answer, and we're going to play that clip shortly right now, is he wanted to answer the question is, even if it was intelligence, does it really matter, and why would have they created it? So I'm going to now share the screen again.
One thing that has held me, I just find very kind of odd about Bitcoin is Satoshi. It's like, okay, there's this guy who made this beautifully elegant invention that could one day be new money, right?
Yeah.
Digital gold, so to speak. Nobody knows who he is.
Yeah.
This seems a bit crazy to me. Like, this has to be deeper than one man. It has to be bigger than one man. Don't you think?
So, I mean, it's totally logical, and I've had the same thought. I've actually done real work on this from the very beginning. So when it first
I figured you would.
suggested to me, I went to the source, the internet, and I typed in, who's Satoshi Nakamoto? Curiously, what comes up is Intelligence Central. The name Satoshi means intelligence. Nakamoto is the name of families from the central provinces of Japan. Like, that's curiously close to CIA.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you dig a little further. Curiously, in 2006 or 7, I can't remember the exact year, I think it was 7, there is a paper sponsored by the NSA, written by Satoshi Nakamoto. You can look this up, like, it's true, Satoshi Nakamoto, who was the chief technology officer at NTT in Japan. And it talked about a peer-to-peer cash system. Curious, interesting, okay, interesting. So I dug deeper. I'm like, all right, if you were in charge of the global reserve currency and you saw the writing on the wall that was going to go away and the only end game was devaluation. And what I mean by that is, once you get into debt, you have 4 options. You can pay it back, okay? You can restructure it, you can default on it, or you can devalue it. Can't pay it back. Like, you could seize all the assets of every human in America, you couldn't pay the debt. Not just their income, but all their assets, you couldn't pay the debt. So pay it back, off the table. You can restructure it, like gives people 50 cents on the dollar.
Right.
Someone's got to take the other side. Not many takers for that, but you could try. You could default. Politicians, what happens if you default? You're out. Politicians don't like to be out. I joke all the time, there's no left, there's no right, there's no Republicans, Democrats, there's in and out. When you're in, you do or say whatever it takes to stay in, and when you're out, you do or say whatever it takes to get in. I mean, think about it. Ronald Reagan, not a Republican. He was a lifelong Democrat. He's like, I want in. I'm going to be a Republican. Donald Trump, same thing. I mean, it's in and out. So they're not going to default on it because they don't want to be out. So you're going to devalue, debase. And that's been the history. Look, there have been 775 paper currencies in the history of the world. 3/4 no longer exist. They all went to zero. All the others are going to zero. Look, the pound sterling, it's called the pound sterling. It's the oldest currency still surviving. It's like 326 years old, something like that. It used to be, for a note, you got a pound of sterling silver. Today, it's like 194 pounds. So it's just been devalued to, cents on the dollar, or fractions of a cent on the dollar. So the key here is it possible that, the other one is if you look at Satoshi Nakamoto, Sa comes from Samsung, Toshi comes from Toshiba, Nakamichi, and Motorola. So you could say it was a bunch of tech companies, but I don't believe that one. But the Central Intelligence Agency makes sense to me. Why? Because if I'm the world reserve currency and I see the writing on the wall, what if I got everybody to swap the worthless fiat into this cool asset, and then I seized it all out the back door? Now, we're, again, super lucky. We, by happenstance, we have 3 general partners, and then we have a venture partner.
Okay, just want to give some commentary here. So think about this in the context of what I've been warning you about at Bitcoin HardTalk. I've been saying that BlackRock wants you to store your Bitcoin with them, and JP Morgan wants to issue you a loan against your Bitcoin so that they can then do what they did last week, a flash crash, and then they can swipe all your Bitcoin. And if you don't have the margin, then they can manipulate the price short term in order to end up with your Bitcoin. And in fact, there is deep connections between companies like Celsius, who had Israeli Mossad connections, and were a part of hacking operations by Benjamin Netanyahu, the niece and nephew of Benjamin Netanyahu, who created a company called Bancor DAO that actually ended up hacking coins or losing coins from the Celsius client's bankruptcy. Then we had Terra Luna, which was an engineering, pump and dump scheme. And so this is how they get your Bitcoin. And then what was the result of that? Was suddenly we had a regime change. So Biden was out, Trump was in. And then we had the approval of the Bitcoin ETF, and we have all of these different stable coins in crypto markets. The European Union is getting ready to launch their central bank digital currency. In America, they're doing everything on stable coins and crypto rails. So the alternatives are being built, and Bitcoin is the gateway drug. Now, at the same time, what is BlackRock doing? They're engineering a multipolar world order. And so what did they do? They got all of their clients into Bitcoin as long as it was via the Bitcoin ETF. So they're creating a centralized honeypot of Bitcoin by making it tax efficient and tax incentives for you to own your Bitcoin from then. Then we have JP Morgan come out and say, hey, you can't use your Bitcoin as collateral, but as long as you buy the Bitcoin ETF, we'll give you a loan against your Bitcoin and you don't need to pay tax and you don't need to sell your Bitcoin. And all the Americans are lapping it up because they're in a very tax inefficient environment. And we're creating this centralized honeypot of Bitcoin at the same time as assets like Michael Saylor, who have public companies, and public companies means you are owned by Wall Street, who is now borrowing from all of the corporate debt issuers and the pensions and the BlackRocks and the State Streets and the Vanguards and the Morgan Stanleys and the Cantor Fitzgeralds. And they're engineering a scheme to centralize as much Bitcoin in strategy. So then you create as much Bitcoin as you can in a centralized manner and create financial weapons of mass destruction out of it so that you can seize all the Bitcoin from everybody that levered up through these flash crashes like we saw last week. And then you have mass liquidations and they consolidate more and more Bitcoin. Whereas if anyone's been watching Bitcoin HardTalk, they know the importance of holding it in self-custody, not borrowing against it. And so you end up on the same side there. But what is the strategy? What is Trump doing? He's doing massive. So Jerome Powell came out and said, we're going to cut rates, after lots of pressure. You got fiscal dominance, which is get the interest rates down so we can roll over the debt, do a big, beautiful bill, increase the debt ceiling, and then shut the government down in order to renegotiate with everybody how we allocate the new debt, the new money that's created. So you increase the debt ceiling to $5 trillion. And once you've got it at $5 trillion, you then have a government shutdown. When there's a government shutdown, all the lobbies that control Congress, Senate, and Trump come along and say, no, you've got to get money over to Palantir. You've got to get money over to Raytheon. You've got to get money over to General Dynamic. And they all negotiate how to allocate the funds and how much to go into the proof of weapons network, which is Medicare, Social Security, so that then can put it in Cayman Island funds. And who's the largest lender to the US government right now? Cayman Island, because all the other countries are selling. And they get to buy Bitcoin for all the banks. They get to dump all the treasuries on the American people while they engineer and reset the world order. And Trump is doing everything that the financial industrial complex wants them to do. You make all the relationships go to other countries, through tariff policies. You push everyone to the east, working with China, and pretend you're in a trade war with China. These are the types of elaborate games that are played. And then you have a government shutdown. You destabilize the country. You say you're taking on the deep state. What is the deep state? They're the mechanisms for propping up the dollar through the proof of weapons network. And so you end up weakening the dollar and devaluing, pushing the interest rates down in order to roll over the debt, make the rich richer, the poor poorer, and push a K-shaped economy. So if you own stocks and assets, then Trump's going to make everyone in the financial industrial complex rich at the expense of the American people, while he tells you it's about making America great again. And then he ushers in the surveillance state through the alternatives, stable coins, crypto markets, and all of that money ends up in Palantir. You give a a social credit score through X. You have Elon Musk, who's a tool for Pentagon budget. And he basically gets everyone on X, gives them freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. And then you start talking, you get your social credit score, and then it's integrated into this alternative surveillance state while you think that everything is being done to make America great again. And again, this isn't Trump derangement syndrome. I do the same analysis under Biden or anything else because it's the same system. They're all controlled by the same lobbies. So anyway, what is the goal? The goal is devaluation. That's exactly what's happening. That's the only way to play the game, which means inflation, and which means the K-shaped economy. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. While those that go into Bitcoin, they end up giving it to BlackRock and JP Morgan, and then they get margin called and their Bitcoin gets swiped. Whereas those in self-custody that are accumulating Bitcoin, ignoring the price and not borrowing against it and not using leverage, they get to beat the proof of weapons network, which is the side I want you to be on. And so maybe, just maybe, there's merit to this, that they are doing everything that would be in line with that plan. But your job is to hold it in self-custody, beat the proof of weapons network, and not use leverage, because that's their tool to get your Bitcoin and get you. And what will they do? They'll give you a stable coin loan, which is their token. And in Europe, they'll give you a central bank digital currency. And that's what is exactly happening right now, because it's always what Mark Yusko said, the fourth option, devalue. Devalue the debt, which is inflationary, which is fiscal dominance, which is exactly what the Trump administration is doing for the financial industrial complex.
Our venture partner is Scott Stornetta. If you read the white paper in the back, there are 8 footnotes, 3 of them, Scott and his partner, Stuart Haber. Scott coined the term blockchain. He and Stuart, this is great. They said, if I lend you money, Aaron, we need a judge to make sure that we keep our ledgers the same, okay? But the problem is, if Mark's unscrupulous, he could bribe the judge to change the number. So we need a judge to judge the judge. But then he could bribe both people. So we need a judge to judge the judge. He says, well, we need everyone in his, that's a blockchain. So he was brilliant, Stanford. And so he's got 3, white paper notes. And so I asked him, so what do you think of this? He said, interesting theory. Nope. I'm like, Scott, come on. You didn't even think about it. He says, well, no, I did. But the way you're thinking about a backdoor is impossible with Bitcoin because of the air gap. I'm like, but then as soon as he said, but with Ethereum, you can have a backdoor. Whole nother story for another day. But that was really interesting. So is it possible it was NSA or CCP? Sure. I don't think it's CCP because CCP is going down their own digital currency. Look, digital currencies, government digital currencies are evil incarnate, right? I mean, programmable money. I mean, all you got to do is watch Augustin Carstens for even a minute 47, Jabba the Hutt or Kingpin. I mean, not good, right? Yeah. Of course, we should have the power to control how you spend your money. No, you shouldn't. So is it possible it was, Satoshi Nakamoto and NTT and the NSA? Sure. Is it likely that it was one person? No. Yeah. Do I believe it was 4 people? Maybe, right. One who passed away, another one who was in jail, and that's why, multi-sig and you can't move. Is it Craig Wright? Hell to the no. But I don't think it matters in that the beauty of the system is that it is anonymous. Like if there was a CEO or if it was a company, that company can be coerced, right? Why does Google get to read all of our messages? Because they were coerced, right? The government showed up one day and said, you want to be the biggest, you will truncate your fiber, one closet for you, one closet for us. Like, really? I mean, like all our data you get to see for, what do we get out of that? You get to exist. That's a real story. That's real. Yeah. So is it possible? For sure. I mean, the NSA created SHA-256, right? So, or CIA, one of the two. So certainly possible. But I don't think it matters because once you unleash this system into the world, it's an adaptive biological system. The miracle was it got to $1. Interesting. 1 to 100, not a miracle. 100 to 1,000, not a miracle. 1,000 to 10,000, not a miracle. The miracle was that anybody used it at all. Tomorrow is Bitcoin Pizza Day. We're going to celebrate. I should remember his name because he is a really, really important person in our history because he proved that you could use this.
Bought a pizza with it, right?
Yeah, and he bought 2 pieces for $10,000, which is over $1 billion. And it was such an idiot. No, he's a mad genius because he proved that this worked. And so the key is that once you release an adaptive biological system and it survives, it thrives and it morphs. And one of the things I love about the debates, everybody's like, Jamie Dimon says, well, Satoshi could show up tomorrow and change the code. And Jameson, I love Jameson. He's like, no, Jamie, here's the lines. And it's only 7 lines. But in order for that to change, more than 50% of the nodes would have to agree. Now, that can happen. That's a complex adaptive system. But one guy can't show up and change that. It's not the way it works. And so it's such a beautiful and elegant system. It actually defies logic to think that one person could have got it all right. Like, think about this. The 51% attack will never happen. How do you engineer that as a single human being? How could you come up with this game theory to say there'll never be a 51% attack, because the moment you achieve the 51% attack, the value would go to zero, because all the other nodes wouldn't acknowledge what you just stole. So there'll never be a 51%. It wouldn't make sense to spend all those resources to do a 51% attack. Like, oh my God, that's mad genius. So it doesn't seem logical for that to be one person, that one person could be that smart, but maybe. But I'm at this point, I don't care, because it survived.
Okay, so look, he articulated it perfectly there. So what is Bitcoin? Even if it was created by the CIA and it was a gateway drug in order to get you into a CBDC, and then we're going to have demonetization that forces you into borrowing against your Bitcoin using a stable coin or a central bank digital currency, and there is mass confiscation, then you may use that not to own Bitcoin, when the right thing was to own it in self-custody and beat the proof of weapons network and play them at the same game that they're trying to engineer on you. Because what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is open source code with a group of developers, and there is competition, and everything is publicly, all the Bitcoin proposals put forward. And then it exists on the largest, most distributed supercomputer that's ever existed, with like 40% of the mining hash rate with public companies in America, which is a risk, 20% in China, 11% in Russia, a percentage, I think 2 to 6% in Iran. So countries that all hate each other, there is a bunch of hash power. Major countries. And then you've got Europe, you've got Latin America, you've got Africa, and you've got all of this geographical diversification. And we have seen that hash power moves whenever it needs to move. So Bitcoin created this anti-fragile network. And then who actually determines whether you adopt the new code? Well, we've already seen this in the block wars. So anybody can run a node and verify their own transactions. We've got satellites up that you can connect your node to. You can store your Bitcoin offline in a hardware wallet. And even if you're concerned about the surveillance, you can use coin joins, which connects all of your Bitcoin with other Bitcoin and anonymizes them in that transaction, unless you live in a country that doesn't allow for that. Or you can do it in a hardware wallet. And in a hardware wallet, best security is it automatically creates a new wallet address for every transaction you do. So, of course, there are elements of this, but then you have to think about it. That's what Bitcoin is. So there is no backdoor, because this isn't on an Amazon web service. And what just recently happened, AWS went down. Now, many people are validating on Amazon AWS web service for their ETH staking, while BlackRock set up a Bitcoin ETF, a Ethereum ETF, and is now applied to be the staker. The staker means you get to do what BlackRock did with shares, because every ETH that you own gives you a stake in a network, which gives you part of the governance structure. So you can set up an elaborate network in order to control the stakes, and then you can build on top of it stable coins, and you can end up having the stable coin issuers that have most control. And so what is happening right now? Trump is currently building a ballroom in the White House. And that was funded by 3 companies that, ironically, I invested in the early days. Coinbase, the sister company of Bitfinex is Tether, and Ripple Labs. And all of these companies have gone off in crazy directions. I'm offloading all of my shares just to simplify my life and have just Bitcoin in self-custody. But these were early investments, and they became multi-billion-dollar unicorns. But they're all in the crypto lobby, so they're hanging out at the White House paying for the ballroom so that they can build the alternative that they want you to get into eventually, which is the stable coins and the surveillance state, integrated with Palantir and X, which is going to be likely your social credit score, as BlackRock tokenizes everything and the financial industrial complex try and persuade you to own Bitcoin in an ETF and borrow against it with JP Morgan so that you can mine a stable coin or fiat currency by using those financial weapons of mass destruction rather than boycotting it. Or you can hold it in self-custody and boycott the whole system. So this is the 2-tiered system, and this is the exit that everybody can have. And so in answer to that question, it doesn't matter because of the setup. So that really leads to another question. And this is going to be the longest clip. We're actually going to play a long clip here because this is by a podcast. I recently went on this podcast. The video hasn't come out yet, so we'll make sure that we upload it to my YouTube channel. I was on this podcast, and he's got a guest called Uncle John. And I'm going to go through, because he articulates, he doesn't use the word proof of weapons network, but he goes through a lot of the history that I talk about and led up to his theory on the intelligence crossover and then the justification and how it ended up open source. Because the point is that it was meant to be closed source, but ended up open source. How did that happen? Because that's a really important question for us to answer. So I'm now going to go through the longest clip of this, where we're going to go over to the podcast that I'm about to appear on with Uncle John, and Uncle John's going to explain his theory. Now, I don't agree with everything that he says, but a lot of it is true. So I'm going to intermittently talk about the things that I believe to be true in the proof of weapons network, and then we'll get on to the story of how this all leads to the intelligence connection into Bitcoin and how it ended up open source. And then we're going to do a theory on who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Mark Yusko mentioned it may be 4 people. And is that person able to move the 1 million Bitcoin that they originally mined? And if they do, does it matter? So this will lead from this question of was it intelligence to who is Satoshi Nakamoto and some speculation around that. Then I'm going to give alternatives, and then I'm going to give my conclusion, and then we're going to summarize this up so that it can have a comprehensive, was Bitcoin created by the CIA? Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? And does it matter, and how do you protect yourself either way so you don't end up like Tucker Carlson with no Bitcoin and no protection? Okay, so let's go into the next clip. And again, this is going to be a long one, so sit back and enjoy, and I'll periodically give some analysis. Let me write that.
A very interesting take that I've heard you unpack on the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto. That this was actually a competitive response to centralized money. That I just want to hear you tell the story, if you don't mind, Uncle Jack. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto?
I'm not going to give you the answer before the story unfolds.
Correct.
So when I did the Danny Jones podcast, we never got to this point because he didn't want to go down the Zionist, Jewish, Mossad angle. So I have to give you some background because we haven't talked about the main player. So the main player is a guy that comes over in 1911. His name is Meyer Lansky. Comes over with another guy
Named the same guy that's in, I think, Boardwalk Empire, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And Mo Dallas, and another guy that they made a movie about, you probably heard of, Bugsy Siegel. And what happens is these guys start out in the Jewish mob that was mostly in the Midwest, like Detroit, Cleveland, that area. And remember, Woodrow Wilson passes not only the Federal Reserve Act around this time, but also the income tax law. So what's the first thing that these new guys, immigrants that are coming over, they have to figure out how to launder money. So where does laundering money, the term, come from? Mo Dallas, Bugsy Siegel, and Meyer Lansky use laundromats in this part of the United States to circumvent the income tax. Then they do something even crazier. They know that prohibition is coming. They connect with the Bronfins. You know, the Bronfins to this very day, also Jewish immigrants, live in Canada, but they were also based in the United States. Lansky becomes their front. What is Lansky's claim to fame? He's an idiot savant when it comes to money. Like, you give him the rules of engagement, he'll figure out how to get around the system. So he then is the major salesman, both in New York, in the Midwest, and eventually to the rest of the world through all of prohibition. He makes the Bronfins fabulously wealthy. This is obviously when he gets on the radar of all the people, you know, in the FBI. Remember, the FBI forms in 1908. This is right around the same time. Lansky realizes he has to stay one up on the lawmen. So what's one of the things that he's famous for? All the things that you hear about Mr. Epstein, Lansky is the architect of this whole plan. He's the one that set up pedo rings, sex rings, all kinds of traps, and he ensnares the early FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, this is a blackmail thing.
Correct. And that's how he got him. He got caught up in Lansky's blackmail thing. But as I told your compatriot earlier, Lansky was smart. Lansky never had assets tied to him. He controlled people. And what did he do? by keeping J. Edgar Hoover clean. Like none of the stuff, all the stuff that we know about J. Edgar Hoover today comes out way after J. Edgar Hoover's out of power. Lansky uses this to control him his whole entire life, all the way into the 70s, okay? So Lansky becomes extremely popular, grows up while he's a young immigrant and meets Lucky Luciano. That's the Italian mob. The Italian mob is the shoot 'em up guys. The Jewish mob are the guys that are the bankers. They become the accountants for Murder Inc. They form a criminal enterprise. This would be like a RICO, a conspiracy. And Lucky Luciano really took a liking to Lansky. And then when they found out how talented Lansky was, that he could figure out financing for any deal that they want to do, Lansky business acumen is brought into the Italian families. And he's elevated. He's so elevated that the story that you know about later, when Bugsy Siegel is killed by the Italian mob, you don't know that there was 3 attempts on his life. Meyer Lansky stopped the first 2 because Lucky Luciano knew. What was the first 2 attempts about is Mo Dalitz and Siegel setting up Vegas in the desert, which was the craziest idea ever. But why did they seek the desert? This is how the Jewish immigrants thought. Like, why do we want to stay in New York or in Detroit or Cleveland? Let's go where there's nobody at. Nevada, in a desert. There's nobody here. It's the Wild West.
No law.
There's no law. That's actually their original mindset. And when they stole that to the Italian mob, they're like, okay, this makes sense. Wasn't their big play. Their big play was down in Cuba. Then magically, what happens? The deal in Vegas continues to lose money, but then the revolution with Castro happens and the moneymaker goes bye-bye. So that's when the Italian mob turns around and says, look, we're spending millions of dollars here. We're not getting a return on our investment. We're going to kill Siegel. Lansky cockblocks it twice. Finally, the last time he couldn't cockblock it, the mob takes out Siegel in the Beverly Hills Hotel. I think it's like 1940, 43, somewhere around there. What happens within 2 hours of the hit? Mo Dalitz, Cohen, and Dalitz, I should say, and Meyer Lansky walk in to the Flamingo Hotel. Everything is turned over to these 2 guys. Within the first 60 days, they remove the clocks, they paint the glass, and they bring the one-armed bandits in. Why does this all happen? This all happens because Mo Dalitz, not Meyer Lansky, asks a question of the guys gambling. We notice that our takes all go down right around 5 or 6 o'clock. And they're like, yeah, the reason it goes down is because you guys don't have any food here for us to eat. There's no drinks. So the first thing he does, he sets up buffets. So the big buffets that, were a staple of when I grew up in Vegas, not when you guys grew up.
No, they're still there, actually.
Well,
I lived there 5 years.
All right.
There's an echo of them, yes.
Well, this became a feature of Las Vegas from the mid-1940s all the way in through. This stuff happens in Cuba. Then they paint the windows. Like if you know the downtown, I think it's Fremont Street.
Yeah.
That casino was the first one that has its windows painted right on the street.
Golden Nugget?
No, it wasn't the Golden Nugget. It's the one that's on that street. I can't remember the name of it, but I think it's called the Fremont Casino.
Yeah, it's Fremont Street. Yeah, there's a Fremont Casino. Yeah.
I think that's the one that I'm talking about. That's where they do the test case before they do the Flamingo.
Yeah.
And then the clocks are gone. And what do they know within 2 months? The Italian mob starts seeing the prices go up. So this is not any science at all. This is just Jewish mobsters being crafty and paying attention to their customers.
Sure.
And what Dalitz finds is that he doesn't have to hold people up. He actually can feed them, give them alcohol, put girls in skimpy costumes, and next thing you know, they're staying all night. So the coffers go up. So guess what happens? Not as profitable as the other casinos that they have in Cuba. But then when Castro happens, there's a huge void.
Right.
It's only Vegas. So then Dalitz really ramps it up. And Meyer Lansky, at this time, this is all going on. If you remember the story that I told in other podcasts, and we tangentially tied to it. How does Lansky become the rock star of the industrial military complex? So remember we talked briefly about the Manhattan Project. Why does it have the name Manhattan? Well, when it started, it was on the 67th floor of the Empire State Building. Okay. That's where it started, 1942. This is after Einstein's letter to FDR in 39, warning that the Nazis are going to be building a bomb. They take the threat as credible. What do they do then? General Groves replaces Albert Compton. Compton is a scientist. You may not know this, but Compton scattering from X-rays, that's what it's named after this guy. He's a very accomplished scientist. Groves replaces him. What's Groves' claim to fame? West Point, MIT trained. He's an engineer and a military man. He's going to lead the biggest engineering project in the history of the world. So he turns around to the 2 guys that FDR hooks him up with, which are the 2 Pilgrim guys. That's John Foster Douglas and Allen Dulles. And he sends them to Europe to procure the scientist that Einstein tells Groves you need to get as part of this program. Dulles goes over there, and that gets the name Operation Paperclip. Many people who listen to your podcast, who's listened to Danny's, thinks that Operation Paperclip started after the war. It's not true. It started before the war. That's actually how we got the guys. Groves makes a big decision. This is where Oak Ridge, Tennessee is made. This is also where Hanover, Washington is made. They're going to be doing the uranium and the plutonium. And then the key point is going to be the University of Chicago, which we've talked about already.
Yeah.
This is where Fermi is, and this is where the two doctors that came into the story later trained at.
Okay, just want to take a quick pause there. So remember what I always tell you about the proof of weapons network. Remember what I tell you about the proof of weapons network. So it started off as the Bank of England bankrupted the UK government. The reset of the world order was through World War I and World War II. During World War I, you had the setup of the Federal Reserve, the introduction of income tax, the setup of communism via the Soviet Union, and then the confiscation of European gold through Nazi Germany, and the Bank for International Settlement that set up the reparations. And then it goes into World War II. And then the British intelligence, you had the creation of Israel with the Balfour Declaration, which brought in the Rothschilds. And remember, people freak out about, oh, you're talking about the Jewish mafia or the Jewish mob. It's just like saying the Italian mafia. It's not, calm down. We know how people manipulate these words. We're not talking about all Jews. We're talking about the Jewish mob, like there's an Italian mob. It's a group of people that were a mafia. And these two factions joined, and they combined with Nazi Germany through Operation Paperclip. So Wall Street was funding all three factions, reset the world order, and created Bretton Woods. And Bretton Woods was the post-World War II world order that is being deconstructed by BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network and the financial industrial complex today by installing Trump to reset the world order and have this quote-unquote trade war, knowing that China's already won, and America's shrinking to a regional power, creating peace in the Middle East. They can no longer, but they take the war over to Europe, which is the Ukraine-Russia war, and then you wage war on Latin and South America, and then you consolidate all of those resources to be a regional power, and America just becomes a vassalized state for the Orwellian nightmare, like is happening in Europe and UK at the moment as a beta test. Where you launch your central bank digital currencies and your stable coins and your 1984 surveillance state and your Palantir and your social credit score. And you control the region because the West just becomes a host for the capital markets. And then eventually you manage a transition away from the dollar, hedge your exposure, and have capital outflows into BRICS, GCC, reinvest in the Middle East, Africa, and kind of go to the next stage of the world order. That's what we're experiencing today if you follow my This Week in Macro, This Week in Geopolitics, and This Week in Bitcoin. So I've always said, if you read books like Operation Gladio by Paul Williams, you'll see that essentially the Italian part was that they laundered all the money through the CIA, which created the drug trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, and weapons trafficking rings and blackmail rings in order to represent corporate interest to build the military industrial complex that would prop up the dollar, make sure that those dollars are basically laundered back via the Vatican Bank into the US stock market so that you can print money, bankrupt the US government, $38 trillion of debt, create wars, profit from wars, create the artificial demand eliminate all competition and prop up the dollar. And then that money goes back into the military companies. And so this is where that setup happened. It was Nazi Germany. It was the Jewish mob on the finance side. It was the Italian mafia. And then the CIA was created from that. And they feed you a story that is like national security. Well, back then, the dollar was really dependent upon national interest. But now we've got digital, and the technical industrial complex has become national, where it's essentially trying to vassalize the world and just use America as a host nation. And now it's because it can't exert influence because it's co-investing with BRICS and the Gulf countries that built sovereign wealth through the petrodollar is coming back home and cannibalizing itself in order to make up for the lost profits. But I just wanted to say that the story is consistent there. And all these wars are fake. You know, they're engineered wars with a narrative in a proof of weapons network to prop up a debt-based Ponzi scheme that leads to the inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed consequence of where we are. Which kind of then we're going to go further into the story of how this came together to get to proof of work. So bear with us for more of the history because it's all going to tie together. So we now have the formation of the CIA, the precursor, the FBI, which came from MI6, and the creation of Mossad once you had recruiting the IDF in order to destabilize the Middle East, get access to the oil, and create the forever war model that later morphed into the fake war on terror and USAID funding all the militia groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda in order to destabilize regions. And they had operations like 9/11 and various operations to radicalize the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews in order to play the religious warfare that they're currently weaponizing to destabilize the West as we currently speak through the proof of weapons network. Okay, so let's jump back in. I'm going to share the screen again. All right, I think I unshared. I think there's an easier way of doing it. I'll share one more time and we'll get the sound there. Make sure the sound's on. I've got to remember to turn it on every time. And we'll continue. I said this is a longer clip.
So in 1942, the war is on. If you know anything about the war, the United States not only got their ass kicked at Pearl Harbor, but they also get their ass kicked in Midway. We win the Battle of Midway, but we lost a lot of our Pacific force. So the United States is effectively already fighting a two-front war. Eisenhower, Patton, MacArthur are fighting the Nazis in Europe. So FDR gets reports that there's U-boat scientists and U-boat spies coming into New York Harbor to find out why General Gross hired all these Jewish scientists and brought them to the United States in 1939, 1940, 1941, and 1942. So General Gross tells FDR, we got a problem. We can't defend New York Harbor. We're just too spread thin. He says, but I have an idea. He goes, the guys that control the docks or the longshoremen, they're all tied to the mob. Let's bring the mob in and ask them for help. I mean, because this their jobs as well, even though they're criminals.
Right.
So FDR looks at him, thinks he's crazy, and he says, okay, and they bring Lansky in. So FDR says to Lansky, we want your help to patrol the docks on the Brooklyn Navy Yards. If you find any U-boats, any Nazis, and you know, Lansky's believing the story that you believe prior to our discussion about Hitler's a bad guy and they killed the Jews and all that. So Lansky goes, yeah, I'd be more than happy to be a patriot and help you out. I've made a good living in this country. But he goes, you have to do something for me. He goes, you got to get Lucky Luciano out of the maximum security prison so that we can run our business together. So why do I tell you this part of the story? Because I want you to fact check what I just told you, because you can. You'll actually see he's moved right at this time. The next part of the story, you're not going to know too much about. You'll know a little bit, but not everything. Literally within the first month of the mob patrolling the docks, they find 19 spies. They kill 18 of them, but they keep one guy. You know why they keep the guy? He's got a very interesting story. He started off as an SS surgeon. He's a doctor. His name is Kurt Plotner. Plotner tells Lansky, he goes that they're doing some very interesting things in the concentration camps. They're making people docile to make them easy to control. They're using fluoride to do that. He goes, and then they're using other chemicals. The specific one is mescaline peyote. And he goes, well, why are they doing it? He goes, they're doing all kinds of experiments to try to control people and do this because they're moving them to different parts of the globe. And Plotner never knows where they're moving them, but this ties into the story I told you before. This is the transfer agreement that Hitler makes with the royal family to get people to Palestine. And Lansky finds this story very interesting. He also finds out that the Jews aren't being killed by the Nazis from this guy. He goes, no, that's not the plan. Our job is to take their money, put it in a Rothschild bank. Hitler took the bank, but the Rothschilds would get the money back. As soon as he hears that, he goes, wait a minute. He goes, you're going to tell me that they're taking these people's money, putting it in a bank, and the Rothschilds are getting that money and they're going to repatriate them when they get to Israel? Lansky knows right away this is a total bullshit story. He begins to realize that the royal family and the Rothschilds set this whole story up. So what does Lansky do? Lansky goes and tells FDR and the people in the military. This is before the military's corrupted, what this plan is. This shocks the people in the US military, but it makes Lansky a rock star. Why? Because he in fact finds the problem in New York Harbor when no one else could do it. But Lansky goes and tells the people who will become the Mossad, this the Israeli Defense Forces. Remember, because Israel's not a country. It doesn't become a country until 48. He tells them the same information he tells the Americans. So everything goes hunky-dory. The Germans can't get into the States. You know that we're successful. So what happens after the war, you know, the blow up with Castro and the mob. Castro nationalized the casinos. The mob loses money. Lansky walks into a casino in Havana the day before the revolution and takes $3 million out. The FBI and the CIA knows that. That money is never found ever again. We think that money was used for them to build up Vegas. No one knows that for sure. The data trail that I found goes back to a Jewish lawyer that's still alive today in Florida, close to where you live. His name's Ira Malnick.
Yeah.
And Malnick is the opposite of Lansky. Lansky lived his whole life like, you know, he's a Bitcoin bum. You can't find out any money he's got. You know, he lived like a pauper. But this guy Malnick, he lives in a $60 million house in South Florida.
Keep us right?
Yeah. And it to this very day, he's a really, really powerful guy and does a lot of work with both the Italian and Jewish mob. And Lansky goes back, makes Vegas with Modalitz extremely successful. Anybody who doesn't know the story of Modalitz, you can literally get on the internet right now and look it up, and you can see what he did. Both of these guys, two Jewish guys, never get in any trouble. I'm talking about trouble like the Italian mob gets in, ever in their whole life. But what does J. Edgar Hoover do? J. Edgar Hoover knows that Lansky caught him in this homosexual tryst, and he's got pictures. Lansky's the one that caught JFK. He's the one that caught Bobby Kennedy Sr. He's the one that caught Marilyn Monroe. He's the one that actually even set up all the stuff that the CIA was doing, you know, with Jolly West. If in case you don't know who Jolly West was, Danny got involved with this in his podcast.
You're saying he was blackmailing all these people.
Oh, yeah. But he was also the banker for General Groves. General Groves gets thrown out of the military. Why? Because Eisenhower, Patton, and MacArthur thought that Groves was going to try to take credit for winning the war by dropping the 2 bombs. And he goes, wait a minute, we're out here fighting the war. And you have a bunch of Jewish scientists making a bomb, and you think you're going to get credit? And this infuriated Eisenhower. So what happens? Eisenhower basically makes it miserable for Groves. Groves gets excommunicated from the military in 47, but the way out the door, he's the guy that set up the first military coup. Remember I told you that the military is pure, but it went bad? Yeah. What is the line in the sand?
41?
No, the line in the sand for the military when they go fraudulent was the 4th election for FDR. The vice president for FDR for those 3 times is a guy named Henry Wallace. Best way for me to describe him to you today, it's like seeing Bernie Sanders. Henry Wallace gives a speech in 1942 that after the war, he sees the future of America as a common man. Well, you can only imagine Groves is doing the Manhattan Project, building his bonds. And he's like, that's not my vision for what the future is. My vision for the future is the military is going to be strong and da-da-da-da-da. And in the 4th term, the polio/Guillain-Barré is getting so bad, Groves knows that FDR is going to die. So he goes to the most powerful guy in the U.S. Senate, is a guy named Jimmy Burns from South Carolina. Jimmy Burns holds this distinction. He's the only person in U.S. history that's been Secretary of State, Senate, and House of Representatives. No one's ever held all 3 positions. Oh. So Jimmy Burns gets the DNC to deinstall Wallace and put up a no-name Manchurian candidate. Who is that? Harry Truman. He's a senator from Missouri. So literally, the DNC in December of 44 gets stopped by Jimmy Burns. Magically, in those 9 minutes, they close all the voting. Henry Wallace led the first 3 ballots. Next day he comes in, everything gets completely flipped. They make all kinds of backdoor deals in Chicago. Truman's in. Why? Because Groves knows that he can control Truman. What was the control card that he used? When he got thrown out of the military, he had Henry Truman put in the National Security Act that got the CIA in. CIA is all of his friends, George Kennan, Wild Bill Donovan, the Dulles brothers. Got it? And when he goes outside, remember, I want you to think.
The CIA was in charge of the country at this point?
Correct. They weren't in charge truly of the country. Still, I would tell you, the Joint Chiefs, the Eisenhowers, the MacArthurs, they were powerful. The president still had a lot of power. But because Truman is in, Truman didn't even know the bomb existed the first 2 months that he was president. You know who told him? Not Groves, Jimmy Burns. And because he tells him, Truman makes Jimmy Burns the Secretary of State. Turns out, why is that become important in this whole historical story? Remember I told you about Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam? Potsdam is when Churchill, Stalin, and Truman meet. Everything that was promised by FDR at the other two meetings to Russia gets flipped on dime because Burns tells Truman, you tell him he's now the enemy. We're not rebuilding Russia. We're just going to rebuild Europe. And just so you know, the Marshal, General Marshal, he's also a Pilgrim guy and also a Council of Foreign Relations guy. Just so you know who we're dealing with. So what I'm telling you is everything goes awry when they push General Groves outside. What happens? Eisenhower thinks he's okay with this. Who's Eisenhower's vice president? Nixon. Nixon thinks he's okay. General Groves needs to have money because, he's a military guy. He doesn't have any cash. He goes out and becomes CEO of Remington Rand. Remington Rand is the #1 weapons supplier of the U.S. military. General Groves is in a position to know that because he had the highest security clearance. He becomes a messenger, and then he finds another company, very crazily, called Burroughs. Burroughs sells calculators, mini computers, flashlights, but they're big electronics. He merges the two together. You know what those two companies become? Sperry. What does Sperry get renamed? Gets renamed Unisys. What does Sperry do in this whole time outside the military? They make UNIVAC computers. UNIVAC computers that they wind up selling back to the U.S. military. Do you know why? Because in 1957, the Russians put Sputnik up in space. And this caught Nixon and Eisenhower completely by surprise. But guess who didn't catch by surprise? Groves, because Groves knew what was going on because of his time in the Manhattan Project. That's when Eisenhower has to bring Groves and his industrial military complex back into the federal government. What was that called in 1958, Robert? DARPA. First name was ARPA.
Okay, I just want to pause a little second here and just summarize it into the proof of weapons network. So I've always said that this proof of weapons network has subdivisions in a power structure. At the very top is the financial industrial complex, because all of these companies need access to finance. And obviously you can get finance from Pentagon, but that requires money printing. How do you print money? Because the banks create it. Who are the banks? The banks own the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve works for its shareholders, but it pretends that it's got this goal of controlling inflation and controlling unemployment. But the chairman is just a patsy for the 12 regional central banks that are actually underneath it. The shareholders are the commercial banks that get to create the dollar every time they issue a loan. So their job is to create as much dollars as possible. But when they want that allocated via the government through this money laundering scheme to go back to the corporate interests. And so what do? Initially, they were subordinate to the government, but they used the military industrial complex and the financial industrial complex in order to build the technology and built the deep state, quote unquote deep state, which is essentially the central intelligence, in order to make sure that they could use dollars in order to get back to prop up the stock market, to create the demand for dollars and go on to this global domination mission that essentially destroyed the lives of many, just like they did with colonialism in the British Empire. But this time it was neo-colonialism through financial weapons and mass destruction and covert operations rather than overt invasions. And so America's had a continual state of war ever since. It creates narratives to make you think they're defending democracy while installing dictators which agree to launder the money back and destroy their own currencies. And every time they vassalize a country, they become a shareholder. Their central bank becomes a shareholder in the Bank for International Settlements. And so you have this network of installing central banks to fire weapons of mass destruction to create war and make sure that everything goes back to lending to the US government so that you have the bond market, the stock market, and the entire financial industrial complex, which is the foundation of the proof of weapons network. Now, when you get a company public, you're able to buy those shares. And with those shares, if you get enough voting rights, you get a board seat and control. And so this is why the game is vassalization, to privatize, securitize, financialize, and today tokenize as many companies as you possibly can. And they even sent the banks public. And so even those early Rothschild and Warburg banks, they became public companies as well. So then anybody could buy those shares. And then you could control the West by becoming a majority shareholder. And so obviously in the Middle East, they built the petrodollar, they built their sovereign wealth, and China built the manufacturing base, and America just exported dollars and debt around the world. But the only beneficiaries of those debt were those that owned the stocks and could manipulate the market and borrow at virtually 0% through programs that later became quantitative easing. So we go full circle to Richard Werner. And that quantitative easing became a way of essentially ensuring this K-shaped economy where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Because you can borrow at 0%. Now, why do the financial industrial complex want you to borrow? For the same reason they want you to borrow against your Bitcoin. Because once you go public on Wall Street, you are owned by Wall Street. Once you borrow from the banks, you are owned by the banks. And so if you take someone like the richest man in the world, like Elon Musk, he's part of the technical industrial complex. So he was about to go through DARPA. DARPA is where they create this military technology and hand it over to chosen entrepreneurs that led to the creation of Google, the PayPal mafia, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Oracle, all of these different technology companies that make up the Magnificent Seven today, that essentially given all of this massive budgets from the Pentagon that creates the technology and then privatizes it and hands it over to the company. These chosen ones essentially get to pretend to be billionaire entrepreneurs and geniuses, but what they do is they get access to capital. And so if you take someone like Elon Musk, his net worth is dependent based upon his share price and his stock options. And so by the financial industrial complex controlling the price of shares, by reallocating the money printing, which is at the bank, they get to have control over the richest people in the world as well. And so if Elon Musk doesn't play down to the agenda, then he can have his net worth halved. And so recently they did an operation to transfer wealth to Larry Ellison at the expense of Elon Musk. Maybe he was using an operation he wasn't meant to use, like talking about Jeffrey Epstein and including Trump in the allegations, because Trump works for the financial industrial complex too. How? Through lobbies. So they made it where you can buy the politician because all the campaign financing comes from the lobby. The biggest lobbies are the finance, military, technical, Israeli lobby, various other factions, and there's crossover there as well. So now technology becomes the next weapon. This is why I call it a proof of weapons network. It weaponizes debt for consumption. It creates cheap debt for those that own the assets and play ball, but expensive debt for everybody else, i.e. if you get a credit card, you got 30%, payday loans at 40%. And you get wrecked and you become the source of wealth for those on the right side of the proof of weapons network, and quantitative easing and various other schemes. And so the entire system essentially is about subordinating governments so that the whole country and the government just do what they're meant to do for the lobby. And if they don't end up getting you budgets in the right direction, you increase the debt ceiling, and you have a government shutdown like you're having right now. So this proof of weapons network has now completely vassalized the entire West because they securitized, financialized, and now tokenized, and it creates this power struggle. Now, what did BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard do, the asset managers? Well, they did what the British Empire and the Dutch Empire did. The Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company, and now you have BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. They get to manage your endowments, manage your funds, manage your pension, and persuade you to give your voting rights to them for simplicity. And that's the scam. They get the board seats, they get the voting rights, and they get to create the dollar and the financial weapons of mass destruction in order to control all those board seats. And so BlackRock is the modern Dutch East India Company or British East India Company that has underneath it the military industrial complex, which also encompasses the deep state and intelligence apparatus, as well as the technical industrial complex, and even the consumption industrial complex, where they can pump debt through credit cards, create the dollar. And that's the system that we have today. But now governments are subordinate to it. And so it can do this global reset of the world order whenever it wants. And if anyone steps out of line, you can destroy their wealth through these elaborate schemes. They can hedge all their exposure through their hedge funds. They can acquire assets through private equity. They can create money through commercial banking. They can financialize and securitize through investment banking. And they can gain access to your money to get your vote and your board seat via the asset management industry. And this was the game. And they pretended that it was called capitalism. And that was the psyop. Other countries, they wanted to make sure they defended against that. And so they have systems like in China or Saudi Arabia where you can't be subordinate. The corporate interest can't become bigger than the government. And if you ever want to take over one of those countries, you say, you're the communist. And by calling it communism and creating this fake dichotomy between capitalism and communism, you indoctrinate and you use the university systems to sponsor the syllabus and make people think that they're, that these are the only two economic models. Well, anyway, so that's a little bit of background. So once we got that, we're building up the proof of weapons network. We went from the financial industrial complex to the post-World War II military industrial complex through to the technical industrial complex, and then obviously consumption industrial complex. And then this is going to move into the resistance, which is the proof of work story. And I know I said this is going to be a comprehensive, and you can watch it as many times as you like, and we'll summarize it into shorter versions. But I want to take those breaks. I know this is a lot of information, but I want the comprehensive. So let's go back to Uncle John and continue with the story. Now, I don't think I need to do anything this time other than play it. But Azad will let me know.
What was the first project that ARPA did? First thing Groves did, he linked Stanford, Johns Hopkins, all the little colleges that you learned about in COVID together with a computer network.
Yeah.
Got it? Something else happens. Eisenhower changes the name in 58 to DARPA. And then I already told you about Eisenhower's little farewell speech and that the biggest risk. Why? Because he didn't trust Groves at any level. This proves to you that I'm right. But what's happening outside the scenes? How does Groves get the money? He starts working with Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky is bringing Groves money left and right, hand over fist. Who introduces Groves to Howard Hughes? Meyer Lansky. So guess why Howard Hughes is linked to this whole story? Because he now becomes the benefactor. He's like the Rockefeller that wasn't tied to the banking institution. He was the bank for Meyer Lansky and General Groves that fueled the growth of the industrial military complex outside the military. So when General Groves retires, he's officially done in 61. Remember, all his people now are brought back in for 3 years into Eisenhower's White House. We have the election. Kennedy comes in. You know the story there. Meyer Lansky. Now, J. Edgar Hoover is on his ass about that $3 million I told you found. We have the best forensic accountants in the world in the IRS, and they can't find out a goddamn place where this money went. It's like it vanished from the face of the earth. J. Edgar Hoover is beside himself because he knows that he has to get Lansky on some kind of deal like they got Capone, like tax evasion, to get him and sidetrack him from being a problem for him. So what effectively happens is they can't catch anybody in Vegas for almost 13 years. And then we have a change with LBJ coming in into Nixon. And Ira Malnick finds out. Ira Malnick, just so you know, how did he become tight with the military? He worked in U.S. Army intelligence 53 through 57. So that's why he's connected the story. How did I find all this out? I found this out when I met with Becker at our famous 2007 meeting, because he's the one that figured out who canceled him. It was all the guys in the industrial military complex. So when I started to learn about all these things that Lansky was doing, I thought it was interesting. Becker told me something that I will never forget. And I thought it was a minor part of the story. He said, Jack, have you ever looked at the Munitions Act that was created after World War II? And I said, no. He goes, you're going to find something very interesting. Cryptography is part of the Munitions Act.
Right.
And do you know why that was the case? He's the one that clued me in. He goes, because Turing didn't do what everybody thinks he did. He was sending messages from the royal family and the Rothschilds to the Nazis. That was the only way they had communication. The second way is what I told you. The King of Spain had a cousin that was a runner between the papacy and there. That's how they kept the connection going. And the reason why they made it part of the Munitions Act is because it was so successful that nobody ever found out the real story, what Turing was really up to.
Right. This came up decades later with the BitTorrent case where they're trying to, PGP, not BitTorrent.
Right.
Pretty good privacy software. Yeah, they were trying to classify it as munitions to prevent its exploitation.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's what brings us to the next part of the story. So in the 60s, J. Edgar Hoover is going fucking crazy to figure out what happens. And Ira Malnick found out that J. Edgar Hoover has got a subpoena out in 68. This is at the end of LBJ's reign, and Nixon's coming in. So they know there's going to be a change of AGs between Ramsey Hunt and Nixon's guy, who's going to be John Mitchell. And Ira tells Lansky, look, the Israel guys set up a program that they had for Lee Harvey Oswald when they tried to kill Castro with the SV-40 laden cigar. That's why he was able to go to Soviet and come back in, so that Castro would think he was a commie. And so Israel came up with the idea that any Jew, no matter what's in your history, you can come back to Israel and they'll give you protection and give you a passport. So he tells Lansky, to avoid the subpoena, you may want to go and do this. So Lansky's really pissed off. He's like, look, I helped these cocksuckers. I set them up in the military. This guy in the FBI, because remember, the FBI at this time and the CIA, they're like two separate wings of intelligence. One is international, one is homebound. And Lansky's really linked to the CIA side and to the guys that are running the military. So he's furious because he feels like he's been fucked because he's been a patriot this whole time. So he goes, okay, to Ira, he goes, hold my beer. He goes to Israel in 1969, avoids the subpoena. Finally, the new Attorney General, John Mitchell, gets Israel to allow them to talk to Lansky. And then Lansky, before he has the famous meeting, calls in the Mossad, calls in the guys that are the prime minister. I think it was Golda Meir at the time. And he said, I'm going to do something unusual. It's going to make all of you feel uncomfortable. He goes, I'm going to tell them the truth. And they look at him like, what do you mean you're going to tell them the truth? And this is just like the Top Gun story. I'm going to let him come closer. None of them have any clue about what he's about to do. So he was working with two people, a guy named Bill Hamilton and his wife. They came up with some weird software right at this time. It's called the Promise software, Promis. This was used in attorney general's offices, okay, that they could keep up their case log. It turns out that it had a back door on it. It actually gave Lansky access to the IRS computer. And he knew everything the Federal Reserve was doing before they did it for a long period of time. And he was...
I just want to give a quick little timeout here. So remember what we were talking about, Mossad and Israel. So we were talking about Celsius earlier. Celsius, Alex Majinsky, was an ex-IDF Israeli Ukrainian immigrant into New York. And his business partner, Daniel Leone, who, while Alex Majinsky went down for 12 years, he escaped to Israel, and he ended up creating an artificial intelligence startup with the Prime Minister's office of Israel as their number one customer. His wife was the head of loans, borrow against your Bitcoin. Think what Cantor Fitzgerald is doing with all these Bitcoin treasury companies. Think what JP Morgan is doing with these borrow against your Bitcoin. Think what BlackRock is doing with hold Bitcoin with us via the ETF. They're building the financial industrial complex to gain as much of your Bitcoin as possible. And then what are they doing? They're taking companies like Michael Saylor. When it goes into the S&P 500, it will take your pension and your endowment, and it will passively buy shares in Strategy. And it's getting the debt, corporate bonds, in order to lend it so it becomes an asset for the financial industrial complex. It's taking these Bitcoin mining companies public. And then with every company that goes live and does it in Texas rather than China, you know, you had the China ban, and then you had a bunch of hash power that went from China over to America, set up in Texas. And then you have these companies going public. Trump does a deregulation. All of these companies start going public, and the financial industrial complex gets more and more of that. And then they build a blockchain ETF. So now they invest in all these different Bitcoin mining companies. And this is the attack vector that I'm trying to warn you against. Now, fortunately, proof of work, self-custody, has the ability to protect yourself, as we covered earlier. But everyone else is going to be falling for it because they're all like, hey, JP Morgan's allowing me to borrow against my Bitcoin as long as I give it to BlackRock. And if BlackRock owns it, I get tax efficiency and I get an easy life. And then it will give me, and I can mine some fiat currency for the proof of weapons network that will be laundered around the world to create genocide. and I get to borrow against it, and I get some fiat currency so that I don't need to sell my Bitcoin. You see how they do this elaborate scheme to incentivize it, to prop up the proof of weapons network. And then Trump launches a stable coin so he can launder $2 billion that goes into Binance through the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund that gives him $60 million through World Liberty Financial. What's World Liberty Financial? The shareholders are the son of Steve Witkoff, the envoy for the Middle East, and Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr., who get $60 million via their stablecoin so that they can extract through this network of the alternative to Bitcoin stablecoin, while Tether, Ripple Labs, and Coinbase are building the new White House building. And then that money goes into the Middle East. That $2 billion goes into Binance. Guess what? CZ gets a pardon today, and he only gets a 4-month sentence. Why does he get a 4-month sentence? Because he gave up his position and gave the US government control over $260 million accounts so that they can start confiscating Bitcoin in centralized companies from anybody that was protecting themselves by holding it in exchange rather than self-custody. What does Mossad do? They contact Binance and they say, take away Turkish accounts, Lebanese accounts, Palestinian accounts, make sure they use it as a tool, a financial weapon of mass destruction in the genocide so that they can't gain access to their money. How did they get CZ? They said he was funding Hamas. So they produce a Signal chat, and that Signal chat says that Hamas had an account with Binance and $600 was in that account. He didn't plead guilty to money laundering. He ended up settling for having a money transmitter with the US companies that he anonymized, and that's what he went down for. But now Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Funds, part of the GCC, ends up with the large shareholding in Binance. They create a tax-neutral jurisdiction. America creates stablecoins, and you create a funnel for potentially taking that money over to the Middle East, because Trump is investing in building Trump Towers, which is why we want peace in the Middle East right now, because the GCC and the financial industrial complex are looking to profit from regional stability and dump Zionism, because Zionism is now a toxic asset. When you combine the Bitcoin, the macro, and the geopolitics, you follow the money, and then now everything that is happening right now makes sense. Back to Celsius. Celsius was the beta test. Who was Daniel Leone's wife in Israel? Oh, she's an IDF soldier, head of social media. That is actually the court case that is happening right now because they tried to create the United Nations, UNRWA, that actually is the one that holds the right for the Palestinians to return and also holds all the cases in case you want to sue the military-industrial complex. And so what is America doing? What is the financial industrial complex? They're saying, it was Israel. They blackmailed us. It wasn't us. And they're making that case go away. And Netanyahu is leveraging his power in this negotiation to make the court case go away. Why? Who does Netanyahu work for? He doesn't work for Israel. Remember the vassalization strategy? Israel's a toxic asset. He works for the military-industrial complex. And he's making sure they don't get sued for the genocide that propped up the dollar. And America can manage their divorce and say, we're the ethical ones. While Trump gives the narrative, make America great again. And suddenly Marco Rubio comes along and says, no, you cannot annex the West Bank. And I take it seriously, while everyone else is saying, no, we're going to go to war with Iran and it's going to be World War III. No, follow the money. The world has changed. Why? Because China normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia, as we talked about, and the world order is being reset. And Trump is owned by the financial industrial complex, Netanyahu, the military industrial complex. And his job is to reset the world order and build a surveillance state in the West for the technical industrial complex, who's subordinate to the financial industrial complex that owns the Fed, the money printer, and is hedging and investing in regional stability in the Middle East, and funding all the wars and covert operations with Russia in Ukraine to get the rare earth minerals and everything we've always talked about. Now they need more because we got this artificial intelligence world. They need more rare earth minerals. Latin America, South America, Ukraine, build data centers across Europe, build surveillance state, digital IDs in the UK, have a bunch of puppets that are just essentially printing money, handing it over to prop up the dollar, to make NATO negotiations, and the money all goes back. And you've got to just believe that you're the good people and you're supporting democracy and you're trying to take away these evil dictators because we're taking on the commies, because we're the capitalists with no free market, while you become a useful idiot for the proof of weapons network and believe all the shit that they're telling you while they destroy your wealth. Because if you're not on the right side of the proof of weapons network, then you have to either buy their shares or you boycott them. That moves into the proof of work story. So let's get closer and closer to the proof of work story as we build this.
Having his computer people update this information. And what else was he doing? He used the Promise software to infect just about every single big government around. Why? He wasn't interested in doing the things the CIA does. He was interested in staying in front of the Rothschilds because he was fucking furious at them for using Jews as a pawn. Because remember, he's a Russian Jew that made good. Yeah. He's a Jew. He's not a fucking Zionist. Right. He's okay with Israel, but he's like, you can't use people as a human shield. And if there's one thing that you'll learn about Lansky, when you do the deep dive on him, it just almost sounds like an oxymoron to say he's an ethical criminal. He's like, if you can't beat them at their own game, you shouldn't play dirty. So he goes in and meets the people in Israel and tells the fucking IRS and the US Fed, I've been fucking watching you guys for 20 years. I know everything you're going to do before you do it. And he shows them how the money is corrupted. The fucking government is stunned. So now you as a Bitcoiner probably are beginning to understand, so this is why 1971 really happens. What happens in 1970, my friend? We get the Bank Secrecy Act. What do you and I call that? The AML KYC laws, right? Because the guys in the Fed realize that the system is really corrupted. In other words, they don't have the control. Turns out this guy who's the accountant for Murder Inc. Has been playing them for literally 30 years, running General Groves' shadow government.
This is a centralization problem too.
You got it, brother. So you probably are thinking, why would he bring them closer? Because he wanted the fucking Rothschilds and Rockefellers to know who they were fucking with. He goes, I helped you guys during the war. I helped you doing this, and you're going to come after me for $3 million from a casino in Cuba? I'm going to make this hurt. So 71, we get the Nixon shock. Why? Because now the guys who are in the Federal Reserve realize that fiat money is corruptible and it has to be blown up because they can't use it anymore, because Lansky's tracking everybody all over the world. He knows exactly what's going on. Then he goes the craziest step ever. He says, if you want to fix your problem, you need to computerize your money. He said, you know all those computers that I had General Groves build, the UNIVAC ones, and they sold them to Eisenhower and Nixon? He goes, that's what you need to do. Now, just remember who's the president now. Nixon. He's no longer the vice president. He's the president. That's where the Nixon shock comes from. It's not the story that the Bitcoiners and they have their little websites want to tell you. So
Nixon's shock is a response to
Lansky
these guys
Papina
realizing they're getting backdoored.
Oh yeah.
So
total
what is it about going off a gold standard that solved that problem at all for them?
Well, because they knew that Lansky knew everything it was about them. In other words, Lansky could rug pull them anytime. Okay. Like he could out them to the whole world, then their shell game is over.
Okay.
So he tells them, you need to come up.
Oh, so he was probably
blackmail them just like he did with J. Edgar Hoover.
So he's seeing
keep them under your thumb and control them.
Right.
Make them useful idiots.
But the blackmailing probably in this case would have been the fractional reserve banking that they're running?
Correct.
Okay. Wow.
So what does he do?
And this is why when we went off the gold standard, the estimate was there's $6 to $1 liabilities to gold in reserve. So that was probably the fraud that was getting exposed.
Correct.
Or could have been exposed.
Could have been exposed. And it could have blown up the entire system. That's where the Federal Reserve Act goes. But remember what I told you about Lansky? Lansky's not interested in revenge. Lansky has always been interested in control. So he wanted the guys that have Rothschild Drive in Tel Aviv to know, I got you by the balls. And he wanted the guys in the Fed in all 12 cities to know, I got you by the balls too. And he wanted to let them know that the CIA was their partner. In other words, that's when everybody's now playing naked at the card table.
Wow.
Got it?
Yeah.
So what does Lansky do? This is the most amazing part of the story. When you dive deep and do your due diligence, you would think that they'd fucking suicide this guy or kill him. They were so afraid of him because guess what? Of all his friends in the mob, they knew what they were capable of doing. They killed the fucking president. Yeah. So they knew the deal. But when the new AG comes in for Mitchell. Realize that this is the time Watergate's going on. What's his name? E.L. Hunt is in there. This is when all the JFK starting to go. This guy Hunt exposes to the Watergate people. G. Gordon Liddy's in there. This is CIA guys. Nixon has an AG that's only present, I believe, for 8 or 9 months. He goes from like February to December. That's the guy. His name's Robinson. He wants to nail Lansky to the wall. And Nixon goes, we're not going to do that. Nixon then changes the AG to a Zionist. His name is Levi. Levi is in cahoots. He's a dual passport guy, the United States and Israel. He understands the game that's going on. Guess what happens to Lansky in 1973-74? He walks out with an acquittal that says, well, he's going to die soon, so we're not going to go after him. Want to hear the funniest part of the story? Go look at Meyer Lansky's charge sheet and then go look at Russ Ulbricht's charge sheet. You know what you're going to see? Almost exactly the same.
What, he was running a marketplace?
You should look at it sometime. These are discoverable documents, my friend. What I'm going to tell you is Ross got his penalty because they were punishing Meyer Lansky. So now, because they never got him before. So what's the real story? Remember what Silk Road was? It was a drug for Bitcoin kind of shit, right?
As open marketplace, people sold a lot of drugs on there.
What did Lansky do? Same fucking thing. Except he did it using fiat money without a computer token. So it brings us to the story that most Bitcoiners want to hear. That's why you asked me the question 45 minutes ago before we went through this random walk. So Lansky walks out of jail in 73, tells Ira Melnick.
Just want to fill a few gaps there as well. So for those of you that don't know, Silk Road was the dark web marketplace created by Ross Ulbricht. And the first thing that the Trump administration did is give a pardon to Ross Ulbricht as well as the pardon to CZ. And he was the creator of the Silk Road marketplace. Now, what is interesting is that the Bitcoin that was confiscated from the Silk Road was auctioned off to many of the VC funds that after we started investing in many of the Bitcoin companies, the VCs came in and they started buying some of those Bitcoins. So they got a chunk of them, but the rest of them were confiscated and make up the Bitcoin strategic reserve that Trump said he would do for America. Now, what's really interesting about that, is also the other part of those coins is the Bitfinex coins. The Bitfinex is the partner company for Tether. Tether is the stable coin. And those actually belong to the Bitfinex shareholders. I know because I'm one of them. And I invested in the recovery when it was about to go bankrupt. And we restructured the company like I did a restructuring for Celsius to help the victims. And so the 100,000 Bitcoin that were hacked, quote unquote, hacked in this network. Remember, hacking I found to be a mechanism for control. They'll obviously blame it on Lazarus and North Korea and the commies or something like that. But I personally believe it's part of the proof of weapons network in order to gain control and wrap them up into the financial industrial complex. This is why I'm de-investing from many of my companies and going for simplicity with Bitcoin in self-custody so I can boycott the system and not borrow against it and not mine some fiat currency because I want to do my part in order to boycott. We'll cover that back around at the end. But Russ Ulbricht got the presidential pardon by Trump, and that made up part of the Bitcoin strategic reserve. And what is it that happened by the executive order and came out? They said, we're not going to buy Bitcoin. We're going to confiscate Bitcoin. And so now there has been a confiscation. I'll cover it next week. A new confiscation of a chunk of Bitcoin so that they can build up their Bitcoin strategic reserve. But what have we learned with treasury assets? The Federal Reserve ends up putting those assets on their balance sheet as we are right now, because Trump never delivered the audit of the Fed to say, does the Treasury have the gold? Why? Because the gold sits on both Treasury's balance sheet and Federal Reserve's balance sheet and probably acts as collateral for much of the derivatives that they used in order to short-term manipulate the gold market. But now they're letting it rip over to 4,200 because it's a fixed supply and you can use it to reset the world order. And eventually, I'm pretty sure that they're going to look to do something like that with Bitcoin in terms of short-term price manipulation. All you need to do is have the long-term vision. And I'll talk you, through that at the end. So they're confiscated. But where did much of the gold come from? So remember what I said, Nazi Germany, the confiscation, Hitler did an agreement with the Zionists in order to export 60,000 German Jews to Palestine and took their wealth in that process. Then after the bomb, the technical industrial complex, much of Nazi Germany's gold ended up at Fort Knox, confiscated a chunk of it from Russia by the creation of the Soviet Union and the funding of the Bolshevik Revolution, as well as creating the pump and dump 29 market, followed by the 33 Great Depression, and Franklin D. Roosevelt confiscated Americans' gold and said, you must swap it for Federal Reserve notes. Then it made the collateral for the Fed. Who owns the Fed? The banks. So it's never about the government protecting their currency. It's about the banks extracting from the dollar in a debt-based Ponzi scheme to subordinate the government. And so if they're trying to do the scheme again, what do you need? You need a company like Strategy. You need treasury companies that own Bitcoin. You need to put them all on Wall Street. You need ETFs. You need to get people to borrow against their Bitcoin. And you need a node of the proof of weapons network like Cantor Fitzgerald, who is headed by a dual citizen American and Israeli like Howard Lutnick. And then you need to partner with stablecoins and create things like World Liberty Financial in order to reset the world order and have the financial industrial complex agenda. And you think that Trump doesn't work for the financial industrial complex? Again, this is not an attack on Trump. This system is a uni-party, and you've got it wrong thinking that changing the politician changes anything. It may give you some domestic changes, but it's the proof of weapons network that's in charge. There is no democracy. And we are at the end of the debt cycle. And so they are rinsing with Trump's fiscal dominance and tariff policy in order to hedge their bets and build the new world order, which requires peace in the Middle East, so that the Middle East can sit between the petrodollar and the petro-yuan and this de-dollarization that BRICS is ushering in. Who came up with BRICS? Goldman Sachs. And they wanted to create a single currency, but BRICS has said, no, we're not going to do a single currency because we know what that means. That's what you did with Europe. And that's why Europe is wrecked, because the European Central Bank and the European Union become a patsy for the proof of weapons network. They tried to do it with BRICS, and BRICS said, no, we'll stick to local currency. And now they're accumulating gold like crazy, and BlackRock's trying to get as much Bitcoin as possible and get all their clients into Bitcoin and persuade you to give it to them while they do all these margin-backed loans, as I've covered. So just wanted to tie that together, and let's go further into the next part of the story.
Go find me the smartest IT guys in the world, because we need to build another system that can stay ahead of the system that I just sold these guys with the Univac computers from Unisys. So what does he do? He finds this young little Jewish guy named David Shum. David Shum, you should know as a Bitcoiner.
So many guys.
Right. But what's the key thing that you need to know about David Shum that's very unusual? You know anything about his family? Have you ever done a deep dive on his family? Robert, he comes from no money. Absolutely no money at all. Like, we're talking poor people. But do you know what's really unusual about David Shum? You need to look into it. As soon as he finishes at Cal, he opens 4 international companies in the Netherlands. Is that cheap? You know how much it costs to open up a company in 1981, 82 in the Netherlands? And here's the interesting thing. Go look at the 4 companies he opens up. One of them is on cryptography. One of them is on a peer-to-peer system. But you know what the other one's on? It's the forerunner of the Minion voting machines. You think they may be trying to game the system even further to their advantage? So what does Shum do? This is the part where I can skip through because I think most of the Bitcoiners know it. Shum works from 1981 all the way through, I'd say 98. That's when his company, DigiCash, goes bankrupt. But what's his claim to fame in that whole time? Lansky knows to set up another system. He's trying to set up a peer-to-peer system that's for Murder Inc. the CIA, and the industrial military complex. How did I get tuned into all this? I went back and read the Warren Commission, and I found the CIA and in the Warren Commission and Lansky have the same personal banker. His name's M. Pinsky. And I saw it in there, and I started to do the deep dive through that. That name Pinsky came up in a lot of Ira Malnick shell companies in Florida. So I started to realize what happened. Lansky made sure that Malnick had all the money. All of that money went to David Chaum. Chaum is the one that set up all of this stuff. And he was told at the time, if you go back and look at what Chaum's initial paperwork is all about, it's about things that would be related to the Bank Secrecy Act that no one else would know. Like there was no impetus in this time in the United States to come up with these ideas. It's almost like they came out of the mist. It's almost like the Callie and Cassie Means people. Like they just show up and want to talk about Fruit Loops and why they're so bad and don't worry about the jabs. Well, Chaum continues on and goes on. And then some very, very interesting things happen. He comes up with blind signatures and he comes up with shuffle and mixed networks. Those become the key to the work that he's doing in DigiCash. How impressive does it get? It gets so impressive that he gets 5,000 customers. Who's one of the customers? Deutsche Bank, Central Bank of Germany. Any guesses how that happened? Through our friends. They're trying to keep tabs on what the hell's going on. Who else? Mark Twain Bank in the United States is the other big customer. Guess who owns that bank? Not anybody associated with the Federal Reserve. So this is a bank that's controlled by the mob. And what are they trying to do? They are trying to take the idea of Lansky, the ideation, get to the execution. Chaum's the executor, to make it come to fruition. What magically happens? Lansky dies in 83, so the mastermind is gone. Chaum has got the idea. All the guys that you know about in the Jewish mob, they're still around, but they're not as powerful as Lansky. This is when the Italian mob starts falling apart. This is the times of John Gotti. This is the times of money laundering. This is when they take out Paul Castellano. And you have Mena, Arkansas. You have Bill Clinton.
Are they using the legal system to take down the Italian mafia at that time?
No. Actually, what Lansky was doing is trying to build his own private peer-to-peer network so he could move money all around with nobody knowing about it, not even the IRS computer. So Chaum is the guy that's in control of all this. But what happens? Chaum open sources it. You know, right around, I think it was 87, 88, 89. What is that? Who lets the door in then? That's where the cypherpunks come in. So it goes open source.
Right.
That's when Murder Inc. and the Jewish mob lose control of the project. This turns out to be the best thing ever for Robert Breedlove and Uncle Jack.
So show him save the day.
I wouldn't say he saved the day. It's kind of like...
well, it would have never happened if he not open source it, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, but he had open source it because he didn't have the power that he needed from all the different people that were putting their 2 cents in. The most interesting part of the story is how DigiCash goes by the wayside. It's sold on the courthouse steps in 1998. You know who buys it? A guy named Naveen Jan. You know anything about Naveen Jan? Because we're getting ready to tie the General Groves bow in a knot here so you can see where it comes. Naveen Jan is part of a company named Infosys. Infosys was Google before Google was Google.
Right.
Okay? And they also are tied into search, surveillance, and algorithms. They're also tied to General Groves' friends in Silicon Valley. He knows that this is ultimately tied to what Meyer Lansky's plan is. Do you know why? You know where Naveen Jan comes from? India. And when he comes over, guess who's the first company he works for? Burroughs. Remember who Burroughs was? That merged with Remington Rand.
Yeah.
So he knew that the keys to General Groves' plan about setting up a private bank with peer-to-peer cash flows was buried in what Chaum was working in. But since it was being sold at the courthouse steps, he bought it all. But he had no idea how to deal with it. So who did Jan wind up working for later? Microsoft. Believe it or not, Bill Gates almost tried in 1994 to buy DigiCash because he also knew. Who else was involved in all this? Peter Thiel and the PayPal mafia, Elon Musk. They knew about this as well to this very day. But Jan takes it, goes through the wind, and then magically this young kid shows up who's a PhD candidate of David Chaum's in the Netherlands. You know what his name is? Len Sassimon. Len Sassimon is Satoshi Nakamoto. Because what does he do? He realizes immediately what Chaum didn't and what Adam Back didn't realize. Everybody in Bitcoin gives Adam Back deference like he's the Pope. Uncle Jack's the only guy that doesn't. Because Adam Back's part is this big. Turns out when Sassimon looks at it, do you know what his claim to fame was? At 18 years old, he gets tied into building the TCP IP network for Tor and the dark web. Okay?
Yeah.
This is ultimately where Ross is going to cut his teeth. He does all the basic work for this. And he realizes through those shuffling networks and how they work, that timestamping is the single most important part of this mechanism. And what does he do? 3 parts in the white paper. What did I say from Bitcoin Prague? The thing that struck me when Jack Dorsey handed me the white paper the first time. I said, this is just like circadian biology. timestamping, and it turns out it doesn't work with quantum time, not time relativity. It's actually Newtonian time. It rejects seconds, hours, and minutes for 10 minutes, 10-minute blocks. And the reason why he had to do that is because what he learned in Tor is that in order to make it work, you had a timestamp to make things connect. That's exactly what happens in us. You got it. So he's the one that puts the entire system together. And then magically, what happens? Where does this tie in?
And so he was then marrying Adam Back's proof of work to DigiCash.
Correct.
And applying
timestamping
is part of proof of work, though, right?
It is, but not the way Sassimon does it.
Okay.
And the key is the most important part of Bitcoin isn't the proof of work mechanism. It's the timestamp.
Right.
Because guess what? If time is relative, you can't have an immutable ledger.
The fact that can't have an immutable ledger without the expenditure of energy.
Correct.
They're both necessary.
But remember, that's entropy. And entropy, everything that deals with a clock, all clocks are is flow meters of entropy. That's the brilliance of Len Sassimon. He figures that out, comes up with the white paper, and has a solution. The reason why...
It's a universal flow meter for entropy.
You got it. That's exactly what it is. And see, it made sense to me because here I am as the mitochondriac, which is the time machine in us. Bitcoin is the time machine in money. And the craziest part of the story is if it doesn't go open source and Sassimon isn't the PhD candidate of Sham in Amsterdam or in Belgium, dude, this confluence never happens. And here's where it crashes back on me. How does Sassimon get taken out? Why does it make sense why he fell off the face of the earth? At 18 years old, since he's a tech abuser like Dorsey was, he gets horrible depression. The depression goes into other mental illness. He develops a functional neurologic deficit. That functional neurologic deficit is why he kills himself. So in other words, non-native EMF, the stuff that you asked me about earlier, this story is tied to Bitcoin. So now when you ask me the story of Hal Finney, do you understand why I went to Bitcoin Prague? And I said the things I said. Why? Because my understanding of Bitcoin is radically different than Saylor's, radically different than yours, radically different than everybody else. Why? Because it's the timing. That's the key. And if you know anything about physics, which I know Saylor does, but here's the thing that you and Saylor never talked about in your big time controls the flow of energy over matter.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is all about time.
Well, then it's power, right? It's
you got it.
Per unit time.
Right.
So yeah, which money is power.
Correct.
So now that's fucking fantastic. So how do you get the evidence to support that conclusion? I mean, obviously you've painted a very brilliant narrative. Like, where did you find that?
All the homework that I did chasing down the Lansky story. And so why? Because this whole thing was tied.
Yeah.
Again, because we didn't get into this so far on the podcast. All of this was tied to my belief as a young man, young resident, that the United States doesn't get back on its feet until we put the people who killed JFK in jail.
Right.
And it turns out that Lansky and the Bitcoin story crash into this way. And it's my work on Lansky that brought me to Sham. Like when you learned about Sham, like when my friends in Bitcoin learned about Sham, they knew about Sham a different way. I didn't know anything about Sham on the cryptography side. So
okay, so that's the longer clip. So let's tie this together and wrap it into a nice little bow. And then we're going to push back on the accusations as well. We got two more clips. They're definitely not as long as that, don't worry. But I want to really have this comprehensive answer and then leave you with what can you do next? And, what does it actually mean? So the first thing is that DigiCash, if you don't know the history, David Chom, it was shut down because it was centralized. And so it was meant to be centralized. And this was the precursor to what Bitcoin actually became. And according to Uncle John, the story is that this was Meyer Lansky connected. And obviously, when Meyer Lansky was taken out, the project continues, turned into DigiCash. And we had the foundation and the stories that came from there. But what is the most important part of this? While the intelligence connections, we all understand the technology, the cryptography, the NSA, all these different things. But it went open source and it was combined with proof of work, which is why Adam Back was mentioned in the white paper. And it's the open source and it's the cryptography, the proof of work that then gets combined with the open source cryptography libraries. And then the DigiCash model that came from it. And so if you believe in this sequence of events, they were trying to centralize it, and it wasn't meant to be open source, but it got open sourced over time. And that's what essentially means that it doesn't matter what the connection was, because it is, as I said, go right back to the beginning. What is Bitcoin? Open source code where Bitcoin proposals are put forward to a GitHub repo of developers that are able, the transparency released to the code that is then mined on the largest distributed supercomputer in the world, where anyone that wants to fire up a node can verify transactions trivially. And you have, you have this consensus mechanism with no backdoor, because it does not exist like DigiCash on a centralized server. And so once you understand the architecture of Bitcoin, you recognize that there is no backdoor, and it doesn't really matter who created the technology. And it was the fact that it open sourced and the proof of work mechanism that created what essentially is the resistance against the proof of weapons network. So how did the proof of weapons network resist against it? Well, firstly, they laughed at us. And I went to the first conference in Prague, which was the first Bitcoin conference. Bitcoin crashed from $30 to $3. I bought my first Bitcoin there. Max Kaiser was there after recommending it under a dollar on the Kaiser report. I then went on to make investments in BitPay, was the first company to try and create the PayPal of Bitcoin. It turned out that that was a mechanism for off-ramping from fiat currency, and the rest of the story. If you go to my blog, simondixon.com, I got a blog where I went through, and a Bitcoin HardTalk episode, I can't remember which one it was, where I did 14 years of Bitcoin history, and I went through all the different things that made the building block after my first introduction, which was the Bitcoin conference at Prague, where I launched my book, Bang to the Future, which was the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin. I'm not pitching the book. You can go to simondixon.com in the Bitcoin HardTalk membership portal and get a free downloadable copy for it. Many of the things that are happening today were predicted in that book because I follow the money. I didn't, and so, yeah, you're welcome to go get that at simondixon.com. No ads, no sponsorship, no agenda. I just want as many people to understand and not do what Tucker Carlson said of saying, because of the CIA connection, I'll never buy Bitcoin. And I want to make sure that you at least have enough information in order to understand that that is a nuanced question, because even the intelligence connections, as we painted a narrative for, it doesn't mean you reach the same conclusion. Right. So we've got one more clip, which we're going to do a pushback, and we're going to answer. So he made a bold claim that it was Len Sassimon, who was the author of the white paper, in combination with the different people, David Chom, that were around at the time. And they tried to centralize it with the PayPal mafia through like Peter Thiel, who's Jeffrey Epstein funded with some of his funds, started investing in all the Silicon Valley companies, is building Palantir right now, which is ushering in the surveillance state based upon a beta test of genocide as a service in Gaza, occupation as a service in the West Bank, the surveillance state in the UK, the surveillance state across European Union, even the crowd control that happened during the Hajj pilgrimage, annual thing in Saudi Arabia, and is border control in America that is connected into ICE, which is the privatized prisons, which is funding the open border, closed border policy. Trump comes along and said, right, we'll deploy ICE. And suddenly you're transitioning to a military state. Why? Because they need to manufacture civil unrest to scare the shit out of you. Just like Trump announced on Friday that we're now classifying groups in America as terrorists. And of course, it was Biden that let them in, which may be true, but it's all part of the unipolar proof of weapons network agenda, because they know the biggest threat at this stage with such wealth inequality as we manage to this multipolar world order is the American people, the European people, the British people. So they need to usher in this surveillance state, concentration of power, concentration of wealth, and they do different operations like they did with COVID, like they did with the Ukraine inflationary cycle, like they did with the takedown of Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, the crypto-friendly banks, the launch of the Bitcoin ETF, various other operations, and tariffs was the ultimate proof of weapons network agenda to consolidate power, and reset the world order and hedge as they do this managed transition that we're experiencing in real time right now. So what I want to do is I want to play the next clip, shorter clip, but we're going to do some pushback on whether Satoshi Nakamoto is in fact Len, and some of the cases for, and some of the cases against, so that then we can decide, does it really matter that 1 million Bitcoin were mined by Satoshi Nakamoto? And are those keys accessible? And even if they are accessible, we can go through some of the important considerations around whether you should hedge yourself or not hedge yourself. And then we're going to do a final short clip, and then we're going to wrap all this together in terms of next steps so that I can finally have a blog to send people. Did the CIA create Bitcoin? And who is Satoshi Nakamoto? And what should you do with that information, most importantly? So I'm now going to go through a different screen share. I'm going to play the video, and hopefully the sound comes through.
It has always been suspected that Satoshi was an academic or in school, partly because of the times of the year that they posted, but also because the Bitcoin white paper was written using latex, a software favored by academics. Other cypherpunk proposals for digital money like Nick Szabo's BitGold and Wei Dai's B-Money were basically just emails, long paragraphs of text. The Bitcoin white paper was written like a college paper with an abstract, a conclusion, and MLA citations. At this time, Len was in school, and he was at a very interesting school called COSIC, the Computer Security and Industrial Cryptography Research Group. Working on his PhD, Len was supervised by posted, but also because the Bitcoin white paper was written using latex, a software favored by academics. Other cypherpunk proposals for digital money like Nick Szabo's BitGold and Wei Dai's B-Money were basically just emails, long paragraphs of text. The Bitcoin white paper was written like a college paper with an abstract, a conclusion, and MLA citations. At this time, Len was in school, and he was at a very interesting school called COSIC, the Computer Security and Industrial Cryptography Research Group. Working on his PhD, Len was supervised by a man named David Chaum. Regardless if you're going to buy this idea that Len could be Satoshi, no one could debate that David Chaum didn't pave the ground for Bitcoin to be created. This guy, David, was thinking about confidential transactions all the way back in the 1980s and 90s, and had this company called DigiCash, putting together great minds with the goal of making digital money. DigiCash failed and ultimately didn't catch on. They had issues getting banks on board, and ultimately they had a centralized point of failure. But his life experience, combined with Len's own talent, must have led to some pretty interesting supervision meetings. If David had failed with digital money, well, maybe Len could help with some unfinished business. The other thing with COSIC is that it's located in Belgium. Len, being an American living in Europe, might explain some of Bitcoin's mysteries. Satoshi references a British newspaper in the first Bitcoin block.
I just want to, let me go back there, hopefully. I just want you to know that, so the headline in the Times newspaper, in case you don't know, you can put text in the blockchain, and banks on the brink of financial disaster, or to quote around that, was put into the first block so that they could prove that it was mined on that day, and it made the first block in the blockchain. Now, what's really interesting, look at that newspaper. Notice how the IDF are invading West Bank and Gaza, and Israel went in on that day. Now, complete coincidence, but I think it's really interesting that Satoshi Nakamoto put the financial crisis headline, so it was clearly a resistance against banking. When I was speaking at the first Bitcoin conference, it was always us versus the banks, and very interesting today that we're covering it. That we have the IDF radicalized army that were, terrorizing the Palestinians back then as well.
Satoshi references a British newspaper in the first Bitcoin block. Their language seems to have some British spellings and sayings, and if you really want to nerd out on some details, Satoshi posted February 15th, 2010, another big jump in the difficulty yesterday, from 1.82 to 2.53. Referencing 14th as yesterday would make sense if they were in Europe, but not in the US. If they were in a US time zone, yesterday would still be today. Potential rare slip up there by Satoshi. In this great piece by Evan Hatch about Satoshi, clues leave us with a paradox. They suggest Satoshi was European, yet someone with the requisite skill set and exposure to Bitcoin's primary influences would likely have been American. It's a great write-up, I definitely recommend. Details how Len seems to best fit the profile to be Satoshi. It's a lot. His background and knowledge of cryptography, peer-to-peer networks, hacktivism, and how he had direct or indirect connections with so many cypherpunks before the white paper showed up on a mailing list. But that can be a difficult part of Satoshi hunting. I don't want to use the word incestuous, but these cypherpunks were all very intertwined. Like a lot of areas of research, there's collaboration, but with open source projects especially, it can be difficult to know who did what under what name. We know Len had numerous pseudonyms he would post under. His old roommate has said as much. I will say that Len posted pseudonymously on the cypherpunks list constantly, including at least one fleshed out and long-lived handle, and even I didn't know what it was. One handle we know for sure is him, is @Sassimon, his Twitter account. And what can we find? The use of the word flat instead of apartment, the spelling of gray, and using the phrase bloody to describe something difficult. What's more, when you compare the times of day Satoshi posted with the times of day Len tweeted, I mean, it fits like a glove. In July of 2011, Len hung himself. It was shocking then, and it's shocking now. He left behind a loving wife, a career, and countless people involved in his life that had no idea just how bad he was struggling. His wife Meredith spoke on this at a hacker panel that was discussing mental health, and I thought about taking a clip or a quote from it, but it just didn't feel right. But if you are interested in that, definitely do check it out. It's a tough listen, but very powerful. Because of his passing, we don't know what Len would think of Bitcoin today. And since his death, Satoshi has not posted on the Bitcoin Talk forums again. I'm going to say something provocative right now. And my intention is not to hurt any family or friends. Even if you are close to him, you must acknowledge that there is a small chance, that Len did not commit suicide. If we're going to wildly speculate that Len is Satoshi, well then what does that really mean? Len was open about being visited by federal agents in the past. And a friend posted online that they would go out driving to talk because Len assumed his house was bombed. I would never imply that the powers that be would kill someone. That would be illegal. But you have to imagine there are people out there who would want to hurt Satoshi. Look at what they did to Julian Assange. Bitcoin is right up there in being a threat to the existing state. Satoshi was right to take every step they could to protect their identity. As I said before, this write-up by Evan Hatch on Len being Satoshi is great, and I have to give them a shout-out. But missing from this piece was some obvious information. Did Len ever comment on Bitcoin? Yes, he did. Preserved on Twitter, I haven't analyzed Bitcoin, but the impression of multiple digital cash experts I've talked to is that it's bunk. Hey, idiots blaming the user whose hacked Windows box lost him 25k Bitcoin. Your currency is fail if your users need to know what crypto is. This big Bitcoin heist shows Bitcoin suffers from the worst of both worlds. No strong anonymity, yet no fraud reversal protection. Of course, there have been rumors of exploits in mining software for some time. A Bitcoin worm could clean up and then clean itself. I'm a bit puzzled reading the comments of blah 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 as to why Bitcoin users become so irrational when discussing its failings. Wow, this actually looks good. The Sex Files, a dark XXX parody. Oops, wrong tweet. It's overwhelmingly negative, and not critiquing in a way that might offer a solution. It's not constructive criticisms, it's just pure dismissal. I've tried to think about if I was Satoshi and then went back to my normal life, what would be the best course of action to take when talking about Bitcoin? Is the smartest thing to not talk about it? To actively continue to work on it, to be positive, to be negative? I'm not entirely sure what the best game theory approach would be. There's certainly a case to be made that being critical of Bitcoin would throw people off the scent, and that Len dismissing Bitcoin is his way of making sure people don't tie any connections there. But these statements were so dismissive that I can't imagine a person working 3 years on something, blood, sweat, and tears, trying to upend banking institutions and create free money of the people, could say something like, wow, there exists a Tor plus Bitcoin illegal drug marketplace. The other question that needs to be answered is, where is the money? Even in 2011, Satoshi's presumed Bitcoin stash was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I couldn't see Len using that money for selfish reasons. He's not going to buy a Tech Philippe. But to not put those funds into any political group, any struggling open source project, anything that could help his wife, a woman he adored, seems impossible to me. The bond Len had with Meredith was very strong. They shared their domestic life and professional life together, frequently collaborating, and there's a bunch of presentations still online of them speaking together at conferences. At some point in those years, Meredith would have known that Len was planning or working on Bitcoin. Do men keep secrets? Yes, but Meredith was and is an accomplished hacker herself. For her not to be tapped to work on it or to help with any kind of community building, it just wouldn't fly with how Len did things. In 2007, 8, 9, 10, Len was incredibly busy with academic papers, open source projects, and conferences. He went to conferences multiple times a year and spoke at many of them. I mean, he was everywhere: Las Vegas, California, Belgium, Spain. The more you look at this schedule, the more conflicts you find with Satoshi posting. Satoshi was involved in a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of communication at the beginning. I mean, Bitcoin was not this finished product upon release. Community members found all kinds of bugs. Many people just fixed them, or at least brought them to the attention of Satoshi, but not everyone was so nice. In block 74638, a guy was supposed to add 50 Bitcoin to circulation and ended up producing 184 billion. Imagine owning 1 billion Bitcoin. So that number brought attention, but it was Satoshi who jumped in and created a patch before most in the community even knew what was happening. In the aftermath, people were confused, thinking, were we just lucky, or is Satoshi just always watching? Did they ever take time off? Point being, when I see the productivity of Len during the Satoshi years, it makes it hard for me to see him as someone at the same time holding Bitcoin up on his back. Also, just personality-wise, Len was described as kind of a wild guy. He had this Monopoly get-out-of-jail-free card he would use if he got pulled over. Satoshi seemed to bristle at the idea of getting attention from law enforcement. Satoshi was careful. Len was brazen. Aside from computer hacking, Len was also really involved in biohacking, which is kind of what it sounds like, figuring out how to improve your own body. We all know eating yogurt is good for your gut health, right? But biohacking just takes that to the extreme. Len's speeches talking about biohacking urged people to push boundaries with chemicals, experiment, even if it meant getting attention from authorities. Earlier, I made a statement that Satoshi has been quiet for many years. His last post on Bitcoin Talk was back in 2010. And that last post was pretty innocuous, just talking about how more work needed to be done to make Bitcoin security more robust. Satoshi logged in the next day, maybe to look over some things, and then never logged back in again. But that wasn't the end. There have been messages since Len passed away. In 2014, on Satoshi's P2P Foundation account, someone wrote, "I am not Dorian Nakamoto." This was when a man named Dorian Nakamoto was getting harassed by the media for sharing Satoshi's name. Then in 2015, we got this extended message from Satoshi's Vistomail email account, written in the same reserved, clear tone as previous posts. Now, it's possible these are not legit, but a user, BTC Drac, looked into this email. His technical analysis was that the message was, in fact, from the Vistomail server. So again, these messages haven't really been debunked. There's no real proof for the other. What it does do is raise the issue that Satoshi might still be with us. The blocks in the Bitcoin blockchain consist of a few different types of data: transactions, the previous hash, but there's a little wiggle room there to add some more information. And over the years, miners have put different things in there. There's song lyrics, inside jokes. I think a Chinese couple commemorated their wedding in a block. Now, if you're a miner, it's easy enough. Once your block gets added, you can throw a little something in there. But Dan Kaminsky did something more complicated and sent Bitcoin to a bunch of custom addresses, which eventually got picked up and put into a block, and created some interesting text, a tribute to Len. And actually, as the face of Ben Bernanke, who was running the Fed at the time, says Len would have probably thought this was pretty funny. I agree. I don't think Len is Satoshi, but my hope is the story was heard and people can understand why this message in block 138725 is important. Bitcoin has really taken off, but this idea of privacy, revealing your info only when you want online, remains a small counterculture community. The open source tools that exist to do this were not developed for profit. They were created by people who thought they made the world a better place. They reject the idea of Big Brother, that corporations have your best interest at heart, and that freedom is only affordable to elites. But there's still more work to do and discoveries to be made. So on that note, An interesting message from Meredith Patterson. Bitcoin isn't ready for prime time yet, according to its creator. Interested people can help finish it, though. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so there's a little bit of pushback as well. And we're going to do one more very short clip, and then we're going to summarize everything together. So here's what I want you to know. The Proof of Weapons Network creates entrepreneurs using military technology. And if you don't bow down to the agenda of the financial industrial complex, it is a mafia. It was created as a mafia. It is still a mafia. And there is no president, no Senate member, no Congress member, nobody that can beat that network unless they remain independent and sovereign. And that is why you have to look very suspiciously at any public company. There is other people that believe that Jack Dorsey was part of Satoshi Nakamoto, and they've done equal analysis. What happened to Jack Dorsey? He created Twitter. Twitter was required to go public. It was a Silicon Valley startup. He was hanging around with the PayPal mafia, the Peter Thiels, the David Sachs. Who was David Sachs? David Sachs works for the crypto and AI department of the Trump administration today to usher in the alternative to Bitcoin, the stable coins, the tokenized real world assets, the all of the surveillance state technology from crypto. Where does crypto come from? Silicon Valley startups that create fake fiat currency with a decentralized label under proof of stake networks to try and get a pre-mined coin that is created with a decentralized label on top of a digital fiat currency, essentially. And everyone says, I can't afford Bitcoin, it's too late, I've missed the boat. You got it wrong. You're suffering from unit bias. You can have a fraction of Bitcoin, whether it's $10, $100 worth of Bitcoin. It is the only proof of work network that was created without a price. And whether it used intelligence agency technology, it ended up open source. And for whatever reason, we can speculate on who Satoshi Nakamoto is. What did Jack Dorsey have to do? Jack Dorsey ended up creating his company public. And Elon Musk, who relies upon Pentagon budgets and big, beautiful bill budgets and has a surveillance state technology, Tesla, robotics, and is ushering in cars that require vast energy in order to have these rare earth minerals that need batteries, that the Proof of Weapons Network is vassalizing what the quote unquote richest man in the world into financial weapons of mass destruction. So what did he do? He took, in order to acquire Twitter, he took his stock, which utilized military grade technology, and he borrowed against it and went to the Gulf countries and said, will you co-invest with me so that I can buy it? The bank then lends him his money collateralized on his stock, and he enters into his court case around his share options, and the Proof of Weapons Network can determine whether he is allowed to be the richest man in America. And he is allowed to be. And if you look at the background on the PayPal mafia and how he ended up with Tesla and who actually created Tesla, you'll find out how Google was created and how Palantir was created and how Tesla was created and how Oracle was created. It is the socialization of losses and privatization of gains in a fake capitalist country backed upon a debt-based Ponzi scheme to extract wealth away from those that don't own assets over to those that do own assets by using the stock market, the bond market, and the credit market in order to create financial weapons of mass destruction to prop up the dollar and have all of these minions that work for the network, including Elon Musk. And then they use the lobby money in order to control the political process. And you have to believe that your vote matters. And you have to believe that you're inferior because you didn't create a company like them. Because if you bow down to the agenda and you take the Jeffrey Epstein bribes and you securitize your company and you get that technology, then maybe you're able to utilize the debt market in order to get quantitative easing money so that you can then get access to all the endowment funds and the ETF funds and the pension funds that is pushed together in order to give BlackRock your voting right, the board seats across 20,000 companies, so that they can usher in the neo-Dutch East India Company, the neo-colonial proof of weapons network, and create artificial intelligence technology like Aladdin. Who uses Aladdin? The Federal Reserve, in deciding whether Lehman goes down, whether Bear Stearns, Jeffrey Epstein's so-called quote-unquote bank that was funded by JP Morgan, Jeffrey Epstein's banker, and you think that it's just Jeffrey Epstein, you don't think that this is an elaborate network, what's behind Hollywood? The whole damn system stinks to prop up this debt-based Ponzi scheme, and it's cannibalizing itself right now. And you get to borrow at 0% as long as you bow down to the agenda of the financial industrial complex. And you think that this is that these wars are natural? This is a freak of nature. The British Empire and the American Empire have been responsible for death after death after death. And it is a freak of nature. And now the West is vassalized into a proof of weapons network that created this monster. And this monster is more powerful than all these governments. Canada's in it. You think Carney cares about the Canadian people? You think Macron cares about the French people? You think Keir Starmer cares about the British people? You think Merz cares about the German people? You think Trump cares about the American people? They are not allowed their position unless they do what their lobby pays them to do, and they put a sticker on top of it to make you think that your vote actually matters. This is structural into the system in order to vassalize and control and pump all money into stock markets that have no bearing on reality and earnings whatsoever. Because it ain't a free market, it ain't capitalism, and it ain't hard money. It's dirty fiat currency that is causing, and we have witnessed the genocide that backs it. You think that this was the first one in Gaza? That's how the dollar started. That's how the pound started. It's been happening continually ever since. A continual state of war, lies, and destruction to make you think that this is an acceptable place of being. The only way we do that is boycotting it. How do we boycott it? Well, proof of work, I believe I've made the case that even if the technology came from intelligence, which is highly likely, it doesn't matter because it went open source. It went on a proof of work network with the largest distributed supercomputer that no altcoin or no crypto has ever managed to compete with. And that's why BlackRock wants your Bitcoin. That's why they want to centralize it into an ETF. That's why Cantor Fitzgerald wants to create Bitcoin treasury companies. That's why they want you to mine fiat currency by borrowing against your Bitcoin, but instead through a Bitcoin ETF. They want your Bitcoin so that they can pump and dump it and do what they did in the 20s and 30s. That's what the system was designed to do. That's what it has done historically. And in fact, the Federal Reserve has engineered approximately 20 schemes. And you're led to believe that these are accidents. Each of them leads to a consolidation of power. And the only way that you can beat it is by not playing their game. So you either buy their shares and have them manage your money and use their ETFs and make them more powerful so that you can beat the system by going along with them, which makes you complicit. So what if we just boycotted the Federal Reserve altogether and instead we bought Bitcoin? And what if instead of giving it to BlackRock in an ETF, we held it in self-custody? And what if instead of borrowing against it, we decided to not mine some fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme by giving it to them in custody, and instead actually build your wealth and become an investor rather than a trader, and not using any of their leverage, not using any of their financial weapons of mass destruction, not leaving it at the exchanges, not trying to get some yield, but instead recognize that we were given digital, hard, sound money, that we can have money we can own, money we can spend, and money that has a fixed supply. And the advantage of a hardware wallet is we can have unique addresses by default for every transaction so that they're not ushering in the complete surveillance state. And if we want to use coin joins and various other things, then recognize that is the resistance. And what is the administration creating? Crypto, stable coins. What is the European Union creating? Central bank digital currencies. So was this the gateway drug in order to leave to the surveillance state, 1984, Orwellian nightmare, central bank digital currency, stable coin, corrupt system, where they all end up buying White House ballrooms in order to buy politicians so that they can subscribe to the Genius Act and make it illegal for them to use coin joins, and make it where the banks and JP Morgan get to use their Federal Reserves and they get to have the yield if they get a banking license. That's the PSYOP. The PSYOP is centralization versus decentralization. And that's the bit you have to protect yourself from. Now, you know what's beautiful? Those that have traded and used leverage probably got wrecked in the flash crash and ended up with nothing. Those that ended up borrowing against their Bitcoin or going for yield, some of them ended up with nothing. I know that because I spent 2 years after that Zionist operation, Alex Majinsky, Daniel Leone, and all the other criminals that got away with their crimes, and Alex is in prison right now. I saw suicides. I saw life savings. I saw people that had to move to Central and South America. And now the proof of weapons network may be coming after them because they couldn't afford to live in America. Maybe they served their country. They ended up coming back addicted to drugs, homeless, because they weren't on the right side of the proof of weapons network. It took their life savings. I saw what happened. And you know what happened? Chapter 11 was a scam on a scam on a scam, where the lawyers spent all of as much money, client money, as they could. And we had to fight to keep the Bitcoin upside, because they wanted to sell it to Silicon Valley. And I know from first-hand experience, go to my blog, simondixon.com, all the reasons why Bitcoin could fail. I go through all the different things, all of the mistakes I've made over 14 years. I've made all the mistakes. I come full circle so that you don't actually have to. And every week I'll cover it on Bitcoin HardTalk. What's happening by following the money in Bitcoin, following the money in macro, following the money in geopolitics. And then maybe, you know what's been beautiful about Bitcoin? Everyone that owned more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, whether it's $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, whatever your net worth is. Everybody that ignored the price and bought it every single month, and every time it crashed, they bought it cheaper, they ended up beating every single asset class in the world. The entire collective intelligence of the proof of weapons network, every fund, every bond market, every stock market, every ETF, every single one of them, they outperformed it. Anybody can do that. And that's what they don't want you to do. And that's why the proof of weapons network got into Bitcoin, because they need it and they want it in order to manage this transition. What are the central banks doing? They are selling dollars as fast as they can and pumping up the price of gold like crazy. And BlackRock is engineering and profiting from every single move through their financial industrial complex. And that's what's happening right now. This is the resistance. And I hear you say, what if the internet goes down? And it's a valid question. Well, the whole proof of weapons network goes down with it. And yeah, if you have self-custody offline Bitcoin and you connect it to a node where you can verify transactions, and that connects to the satellite, guess what? Everything will be there when the internet comes back on. And there are ways of managing that. Yes, it will harm the network. But if it doesn't come back on, that's what gold is for. But we're going to be in a very, very dark world because the proof of weapons network goes down as well with that one. So that's what gold is for. You can hedge with gold as well. And gold is outperforming. Central banks are going for gold. BlackRock's getting all the banks into Bitcoin, and they're trying to steal your Bitcoin so that they can end up with it. Are you going to fall for it? Or are you going to learn the damn skill to protect yourself in a surveillance state, self-custody, and the ability to do that? Now, it's not all or nothing. There's all sorts of things we can consider. But what is the advantage? We get to boycott the system. And I've seen from boycotts, they care about their share price. They care about your money. And as you become wealthy, as everyone that has done this consistently for 4 to 5 years, I can't promise it will happen again, but I've been telling everyone since $3 to do this. And I built a network of incredibly wealthy people that are fighting against the proof of weapons network. And many of them are falling and converting to ETFs and doing all these shenanigans, buying shit coins, falling for all that stuff. When the gift was given to us. And all you need to do is take advantage of it. All you need to do is recognize that everybody that has done that has built and end up with a net worth where they can actually buy the lobbies. How do you think the crypto lobby ended up buying them? And that's the only vote that matters, your money. It's the only thing the Proof of Weapons Network listens to. Spend local, invest in decentralization, invest in your own skills, look after your own communities, wherever you can. Because I think you got 5 years to adjust. Because there is 200 years of change that's going to come in the next 5 years. If you haven't noticed the pace, if you haven't noticed the layoffs, if you haven't noticed artificial intelligence is disrupting everything. Why? Because they want you on a universal basic income. There's only going to be 2 types of people. Those are only assets that managed to escape the network, and those that ended up with all the debt and the proof of weapon and ended up with a universal basic income. We're going to have rapid change ahead. The old rules don't work. And you can see it. You do not rely on governments. There is no sovereign Western government that's got your back. They are lying to you continually. The media is a propaganda machine controlled by the Proof of Weapons Network. The politicians are controlled. They're all bought. They're prostitutes. They get rich in the process. It's corrupt as it can be. And this is the resistance. And we need more of you to have that wealth outside of the system so that you can allocate it. And that's what I think the next journeys are, the journeys ahead. It's a continual struggle. That's what life is all about. So I'm going to play a final clip, and then we're going to conclude. Was Bitcoin created by the CIA? Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? Does it matter? And what can you do? It's going to be a very quick clip.
Is it fair to say then that Meyer Lansky's attempt to outsmart centralized money powers and stay one step ahead of them is the legacy that gave rise to the ideas that were precursor to Bitcoin and ultimately became Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin is this long sequence of ideas and trial and error, right? And then eventually all the pieces are put together properly.
I'm gonna phrase it for you without the word salad you just gave. Meyer Lansky is the idiot. I'm gonna say Meyer Lansky is the idiot savant of Bitcoin.
Okay.
And the reason why is, remember what I told you his claim to fame was? He was an accountant and he knew about math and money. He wasn't a cryptographer, but he knew where the answer lied, and he controlled people to actually get the answer. And the craziest part of the story is Lansky's able to do this from the grave. And actually Satoshi, Len Sassimon, I believe also lights that from the grave. And the reason why I think this story is important is because this is where I got my piece. I've always believed, because you heard what I said about COVID, that the people that killed JFK, I need their heads on a platter before I'd be okay with this. And it turns out, when I figured all this stuff out about Lansky, Sassimon, and Bitcoin, this is where I got my piece. I've always believed, because you heard what I said about COVID, that the people that killed JFK, I need their heads on a platter before I'd be okay with this. And it turns out, when I figured all this stuff out about Lansky, Sassimon, and Bitcoin, I realized that we had their heads. I realized that the people that needed to be penalized are now going to be penalized. And now when I see the current events that are unfolding right now, you can imagine how I see these things compared to how most other Bitcoiners see them, and why I'm kind of okay with the narrative that's there. Why? Because I may not get to see it, Robert, in my life, but the one nice thing about sharing this story with you as a young Bitcoiner, you're going to be alive and you're going to remember this day when you heard the story the first time. And you're going to check things off. This got fixed. This got fixed. This got fixed. All the things, because the greatest idea got open sourced and we got immutable money. We got money that you can't fuck with. This is what Meyer Lansky basically, in my head, I can envision him saying to the intelligence agencies when they had him on the subpoena, what he said to J. Edgar Hoover, what he said to Nixon's AG. Like, you think you're going to put me in jail after I helped you find Kurt Plotner and figure out who your enemies really were? That it wasn't Germany? It was really the fuckers that were running the bank? I mean, dude, I got to be honest with you. I don't know of a more satisfying ending.
Couldn't agree more. We need to make it a satisfying ending because sadly, the proof of weapons network is incredibly powerful. And the financial industrial complex only listens to money. It doesn't care about votes, doesn't care about presidents, doesn't care about prime ministers, doesn't care about Senate, doesn't care about Congress, doesn't care about judicial. It's buttoned up the whole system. It weaponizes religion, doesn't care if you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim. It will use you as useful idiots in order to divide and conquer. And that's what the proof of weapons network strategy has always been. Divide, conquer, weaponize civil unrest, hate, death, destruction, and that's what backs the dollar. So you ask me, do I want to save the dollar by getting global adoption of stable coins? That would be a tragedy. People criticize me for doomerism sometimes. This is not doomerism. With the fall of the proof of weapons network or the regional collection, you can go somewhere else that is right, because Liberation Day that Trump gave on the 2nd of April, 2025, was to liberate the world from the dollar. It doesn't need to be saved. It shouldn't be saved. And a lot of people will die if it is saved. And so recognize that if you can take your wealth with you and you can build it and you can put together a 5-year plan, you can own more Bitcoin this month than the last month. I can't promise it will work out for you. But I can promise it worked out for everybody that did it ever since it's been $3. And I still do it to this day, and I'll do it with you. And eventually we can boycott the Fed. We can boycott BlackRock. We can boycott the banks and not borrow against it. I bought my Bitcoin outright. I don't own a damn thing. And I got a company that's not got Silicon Valley. It's not about to go public. And I'm not a tool for the financial industrial complex as all those others are, because they built this sophisticated system. The equity markets, the debt capital markets, the credit markets. Those were actually good inventions, but they structured it as a debt-based Ponzi scheme and pretended it was free trade and capitalism. It ain't. It makes the government bigger. It makes the rich richer. It socializes the losses for those in debt and privatizes the gains with those in assets. And it only ends in civil unrest. And when civil unrest happens locally, an external force comes along. And what do? They reset the world order and they hedge and they invest in the order. It morphs away. Exit is the only strategy. And so I will continue to do this. So in answer to this question, did the CIA create Bitcoin? In my opinion, the CIA and the NSA created various factions of technology that made its way into open source code. And those that were involved and paid for by the Proof of Weapons Network were meant to create this system. And the people that were around are no longer with us today in majority. Hal Finney's not with us. Len Sassimon is no longer with us. And Craig White certainly ain't Satoshi. And even if a documentary tries to take a Zionist like Peter Todd and say that he created Bitcoin while he pushes nuclear warfare and all sorts of strange ideologies that doesn't even own any Bitcoin, recognize that that's a psyop, just like Craig Wright was a psyop. They may have been around, like some of them may have been the T-Boys. But the point is that it's highly likely that those keys do not return. And if those keys do return, then so what? All they can do is sell them, create cheap Bitcoins. And if you're buying that month, you get cheaper Bitcoin. It will suck up 1 million Bitcoin, just like it did in the recent flash crashes and all that liquidity. And then we can move on anyway. But Satoshi Nakamoto, it doesn't really matter who it is, because it was the open source code, the proof of weapons network, the nodes, the user activated soft fork, and the journey that we can all share together as we resist against the proof of weapons network with peaceful proof of work. And they're going to use it too. And that's the sad thing. What comes with an open source network that anyone can use, of course they'll use it. But they can't get your Bitcoin in self-custody. And we can continue to resist. And the majority of Bitcoin is outside of their system. And we can create two-tiered Bitcoin. But as long as you exit and you boycott, then we can create a community that can create more sovereignty for individuals, corporations, and even countries that have been destroyed by the proof of weapons network. It's been my lifetime mission to try and support some of these war-torn countries and utilize these skills. But whatever happens, it's a journey we all share together. If you enjoy this, I don't do ads. I don't do sponsorship. Bitcoin gifted me where I don't have to bow down to the proof of weapons network. So I don't really care other than trying to get more people prepared for what comes next. If you'd like to prepare, there's a few things you can do. We uploaded a video to a YouTube channel by Bitcoin Archives last couple of weeks ago that had 138,000 views on an interview on a channel that had 16,000 subscribers. I've got 104,000 subscribers, and we got, I think, 23,000 views. So it's just the community that I rely upon. If you think other people are interested in this, we've got the full version. We'll create a blog version of this. We'll create a TLDR condensed version. We'll create everything we can and shorter versions, but comprehensively, I'll publish this on simondixon.com. Subscribe to me on YouTube and help me beat the algorithm and the shadow ban. Put a comment below. And in future episodes, we'll try and do quick Q&As and various other things. How are we doing for time? I think we did the 3-hour mark. And we'll do Q&As and various other things in the future. Follow me on X if you don't follow me already. I regularly give commentary in real time about what's happening by following the money so that you can see through all the bullshit and lies that they're telling you and protect yourself so that we can protect each other as a community. In case YouTube takes me down because we know that it is part of that network, then Tether invested in Rumble. If that gets corrupted, follow me over on Rumble. And in case all of that gets corrupted, I have to use the tools on Apple and Spotify. You can download this and listen to it in the gym bit by bit if it's too long. Or I'll do a backup on my website, simondixon.com. And I created a portal, Bitcoin HardTalk membership portal, so that I can email you every week, every time I go live, and every time I got something of value for you. Won't sell you anything, but I'll just give you content so that you can be more prepared. We can share this journey. Every week on Bitcoin HardTalk, I do this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. And if you're on that mailing list, at least I can get more traffic to try and beat the shadow banning as well. Hopefully this video survives. We had the buffering thing. But always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. I personally believe that life is a test. The struggle continues. And it's how we react to the challenges that define us and what happens in the afterlife. That's my personal belief and ideology. And it's the way that I live, whatever it is for you. Many people are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do incredibly well. I want you to be on the right side of this change because not enough people are. So make sure that you get your friends and your loved one and you're a source of, a source of good. because other people are going to be on the wrong side of this. Hopefully we can do it with peace, love, and unity. The Proof of Weapons Network has resistance against it. But I'll continue to share the journey for as long as my voice and brain works. And I'm able to push these messages out there. As I said, the next 5 years are going to be more change. It's going to be 200 years of change in the next 5 years. And even if it's not, even if I'm wrong about everything, bookmark this. You can judge me and let me know. I publish my predictions, and you can come back and you can hold me accountable to them. But even if it doesn't happen, at least you be prepared for it happening, and you'll be better even if none of this happens anyway. And that's what I'd love to do. So if you enjoyed Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 103, we answered the question, did the CIA create Bitcoin? I believe it came from factions of intelligence, but it doesn't matter because it went open source. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? We still don't know, and it doesn't really matter. And there's lots of theories around it. But as long as we can resist and it exists outside the system, then hopefully you've got the answers that you need. I'll see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 104. Peace.